They say there are cruel ways to die, but none compare to the pain of being buried alive by the person you gave everything to. Because that's what happened to Carol Peterson, a mother who raised her son alone with love, effort, and faith. One afternoon, without warning, she was abandoned in a cemetery as if she were trash. But what her son didn't know was that in that very spot, a secret lay dormant, capable of destroying everything. Now I warn you, if you have ever been a child or a mother, this story is going to hurt you. And if you don't want to miss what comes next, because trust me, this is not what it seems, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and leave your like. That's the only way this story will reach more people like you. And write the word life in the comments if you believe that even among the dead, the truth continues to breathe. Now, listen carefully. It was 4:30 in the afternoon when the black car stopped in front of Greenwood Cemetery, one of the oldest cemeteries in New York City. The sun beat down fiercely on the gravestones, and the dry dust of the wind seemed to stick in your throat. Robert Peterson, a well-dressed man with a severe gaze and a tight mouth, stepped out of the car with determined strides. Without even opening the door for his mother, he shouted from outside, "Get out! We're here!" Carol, who was 77 years old, thin, wearing one of those floral dresses you rarely see anymore, slowly leaned forward to get out. Her knees were shaking. She carried a knitted bag, a small rolling suitcase, and hope. She thought they were going to visit someone. She thought maybe her son was surprising her with something special. "Are we going to see your dad? Or are we here for your uncle's anniversary, son?" she asked with a faint smile. Robert didn't answer. He just grabbed the suitcase. He dragged it to the center of the cemetery and dropped it next to a stone bench. Then he took a deep breath, as if he were about to do something he had been rehearsing for a long time. "No, Mum, we're not visiting," he said. "I brought you here because this is your place." Carol blinked in confusion. "How?" "I don't understand." "What are you saying, Bobby?" "I'm saying you can't live in my house anymore, that I don't want you there, and that here, this is where you are going to stay." The silence was so profound that even the birds fluttering in the cypress trees quieted down. "You are abandoning me in a cemetery." "Don't look at it that way," he said. "Call it closing a chapter. For you, for me. I'm tired of carrying your past, your things, your guilt. I'm not that kid you raised anymore. Now I'm a man and you are a burden." Carol sank onto the bench, unable to stand. Her body trembled, her heart ached. But what hurt the most was that there was no anger in her son's eyes. There was indifference, and that is much worse. "Robert, I gave you everything I had. I busted my butt washing laundry so you could go to college. I put up with your father when he hit me so you wouldn't grow up without a father figure. And that's exactly why you're here, Mum," he interrupted. "Because I'm tired of your sacrifices, tired of your way of making me feel guilty for being successful. I don't need your stories. I don't need your presence or your memory." Robert walked back to the car. Before closing the door, he said, "If you leave here, I'll call the authorities. I don't want to hear anything more from you." And he drove away, without looking back, like someone tossing a broken bag into an empty lot. Carol was left alone. All around her were only old graves, rusted crosses, and names no one remembers anymore. The wind blew hard, but she didn't move. Her gaze was fixed on the ground, as if waiting for someone, anyone, to tell her that all of this was a nightmare. The suitcase had sprung open when it hit the ground. Among the few clothes, there was something unexpected, a white envelope with her name on it. She took it in her trembling fingers. The handwriting was firm, old-fashioned, feminine. It wasn't Robert's handwriting, or Susan's, her daughter-in-law. It was someone else's, someone she had tried to forget. And just as she looked up, she felt her blood run cold. Behind a headstone, about 20 yards away, a woman was watching her. A slender figure with dark hair and a sky-blue dress. She didn't move. She just watched her. Carol recognized her. She didn't know how, but she recognized her. And then the woman disappeared. That was the moment Carol understood that her son had left her alone among the dead, but that the dead had not left her alone. The breeze kept cutting through the air between the pines in the cemetery, as if the wind wanted to sweep away the unspoken words, the cries that never came out, the questions Carol still didn't have the strength to ask. Sitting on that stone bench, at the foot of ancient graves and damp earth, with a shriveled heart and eyes dry from too much pain, she held the white envelope in her fingers as if it were burning her. She opened it slowly. The paper crackled. The letter was written in blue ink, in a clear, though slightly shaky, hand. It had no date or signature, but the content was enough to make her hands cold. I don't know if you will ever forgive me. I don't know if you will recognize these words. But you know what you did. You know you denied me. You know you lied to everyone. And above all, to her. The letter didn't mention names, but in every line Carol heard the voice of a ghost, someone who not only knew her story, but also her guilt. She continued reading. She has the right to know. She has the right to know where she comes from, and you have the obligation to tell it. Because the past always returns, Carol, and when it does, it will be in this very place. The paper trembled in her hands. She put it down. She felt dizzy. It can't be, she murmured, her voice breaking. It can't be her. She didn't finish the sentence. Something inside her, perhaps instinct, perhaps fear, told her she wasn't alone. She got up as best she could. She walked a few steps among graves without looking at who they belonged to. Her knees faltered. She felt like her heart was too big for her chest. She looked toward the trees in the distance, where she thought she had seen the woman in blue. But there was no one, only silence. She returned to the bench. She sat down. She closed her eyes. In her mind, the image of a little girl. A girl with black hair, big eyes, holding a rag doll. Emily, she whispered, without realizing she had said the name out loud. It was the first time in more than 30 years that she had pronounced that name, and doing so felt like the past tearing open like a poorly healed wound. At that instant, a metallic sound snapped her out of her thoughts. "Excuse me, are you all right?" The voice of an older man startled her. He came from the side where a rusted wheelbarrow loaded with flowers and tools rested in the shade of a cypress tree. Carol turned. She recognized that face immediately, even though time had worn it down. "Roger, is that you?" "It is. Carol, it's me. Do you remember me?" Roger had been her neighbor for decades in the Lower East Side, before he retired and started working at the cemetery as a maintenance manager. Life had brought him here, and apparently life had brought her here too. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "And that suitcase, did they leave you alone?" She didn't answer. She just looked at him, with eyes full of something that wasn't just sadness, it was shame. "My son brought me," she said. "He said that this is where I belong." Roger clenched his jaw. He took a deep breath. "Ungrateful kid. How can anyone do that to their own mother?" Carol looked away. "I don't blame him entirely." "Don't say that, Carol. I saw you both. You, your son. No one can say you weren't a mother. You gave everything for that kid. And now—" He didn't finish the sentence. He bent down and picked up the letter that had fallen beside the bench. He read a few lines and frowned. "Who left you this?" "I don't know. I found it inside the suitcase. But I think I know who wrote it. Or at least, who could have." Roger looked at her closely. "Who are you talking about?" Carol was silent for a few seconds. Then she swallowed and said, "Someone who should have been dead years ago." Roger moved closer. His expression changed. "Are you talking about your sister?" Carol didn't answer, but in that silence, Roger knew that something very old, very buried, was about to come to light, and that Carol's abandonment was not the beginning of a punishment, but the echo of a story that should never have been silenced. They stayed there, she sitting, he beside her. And between the two of them, a truth they didn't yet know how to face, but which they soon wouldn't be able to avoid. Because the name Carol had sworn never to pronounce again had just broken the silence. Roger had remained silent, watching Carol with a frown, his arms crossed and his heart shrinking with anger. In his face, weathered by years and sun, there was no judgment, but a deep sadness, a mixture of helplessness, disgust, and compassion. But Carol wasn't crying, not at that moment. Her face was dry, motionless, as if her soul had gone out. "Roger," she finally murmured, "you know what hurts more than abandonment?" He looked at her without answering. "It hurts more when abandonment doesn't come from a stranger, but from someone you shaped with your own hands." Then, almost as if she needed to prove something to him, as if she had to tear the truth out of herself, she said, "Robert didn't make that decision alone. The one who pushed him was Susan." The way she spoke that name carried a history, and not just any history, one full of tension, resentment, and fear. Roger sat down beside her without saying a single word. And Carol, as if someone had finally turned the tap in her throat, began to speak. Years ago, when Robert met Susan, Carol felt an immediate distrust she couldn't explain. It wasn't anything the young woman did directly. Susan was polite, attentive, always with sweet words when Robert was present. But when they were alone, Carol noticed the change. She wasn't just any daughter-in-law. There was an ambition in her disguised as kindness, a way of controlling things without raising her voice. Robert let himself be enveloped. Like many men, he confused manipulation with a strong personality. Within a few months, Susan had already made decisions in the house, rearranged furniture, changed curtains. And most importantly, she had started to make it clear that the mother-in-law's place was not there. "It's not that I don't love her, honey," Susan told Robert, while pouring coffee in the living room of their new apartment on the Upper West Side. "But you need your space. You're an adult. Your mum needs to understand that she's done raising you, she's done her duty, and now it's our turn to live our lives." Robert, accustomed to pleasing, nodded. He didn't want conflict, but he also didn't want to see his mother suffer, at least not back then. However, Susan kept insisting. "Besides," she continued one evening, "that house in the Lower East Side where your mother lives, could we sell it? It's worth a lot. With that, we could invest, you know, start something big. You wouldn't believe how many people are interested in that area." Robert swallowed. "That house is hers. She's your mother, and you are her only son. Everything she has will be yours anyway. All we're doing is moving the process along. Or what? Are you going to wait until she dies to move forward in life?" Robert didn't answer. "Think about it, sweetie. I'm not asking you to abandon her, just to put your family first, the one you are forming with me." Carol had noticed. Every time Susan visited the house, her footsteps were noisy, as if she didn't want to tread on ground she didn't feel was hers. She looked at everything with disdain. She touched the old furniture as if it were dirty. And as soon as Robert left for work, she would be alone with her mother-in-law, and the mask would drop. You know, Carol, sometimes I think you enjoy staying in this house just to get in your son's way. He could have so much more if he wasn't carrying you around. I am not a burden, Carol replied calmly. Of course not. You are the anchor, the chain, the reminder of everything he wants to leave behind. She never told Robert those words. Carol kept everything bottled up, just as she had for years. She thought time would put things in their place, that her son's heart would know how to distinguish between love and manipulation. But it didn't happen that way. Years passed, and with each one, Susan sowed the seed of distance. You don't realize it, Mum, Robert told her one day, but it's not easy living with you. You make me feel guilty for everything. You always remind me of what you did for me. You always compare me to Dad. And I just want to live my life without that shadow over me. I am a shadow to you. I don't say it with malice. I'm just drowning. Carol didn't reply. She watched him leave, her heart tight, but without shedding a tear. She knew how to separate us, Carol said, looking at Roger. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to push me out. She just planted the idea in his mind that I no longer had a place. Roger shook his head. And you still justify him. I don't justify him, but I understand him. I made mistakes, Roger. Maybe he was also carrying things I didn't see. And what mistake justifies a son leaving his mother alone in a cemetery? Carol didn't answer, but in her mind, the words of the letter kept echoing. You know you lied to everyone, and above all, to her. Then she looked at Roger with the most serious eyes he had ever seen. Roger, if the woman I saw among the tombs this afternoon was who I think she was, then this isn't just about a son's abandonment. It's about a debt I've been dragging along for decades, and which has now come to collect. Roger observed her in silence, and for the first time, he felt that Carol's fear wasn't just about what she had lost, but about what was about to return. The sky was beginning to darken over New York City. The wind grew colder, and the shadows of the cypress trees in the cemetery stretched out like tired arms. Roger walked Carol to a small shed he used as a storage room and refuge. It was nothing more than a narrow room with a cot, a chair, an old lamp, and the smell of damp wood, but at least it offered shelter. Stay here tonight, Carol. Tomorrow we'll see what to do, he said, leaving a blanket on the cot. Thank you, Roger. I never thought I would end up like this, with just the clothes on my back, and in a cemetery. You are not alone. Carol nodded, though deep down she knew she was, or at least she had believed that. Until that letter and that apparition among the graves opened a wound she could no longer ignore. Roger said goodbye and left. Carol lay down. Her body was heavy, but her conscience was heavier. She didn't close her eyes. Night found her awake, listening to distant noises, echoes of footsteps she would never know were real or ghosts from her past. The next morning, in the Lower East Side neighborhood, Father Eugene left the Our Lady of Solitude parish early. As he did every Thursday, he carried a list of visits to elderly parishioners who could no longer attend Mass. But that day, upon arriving at Carol's house, he found the front gate locked and a makeshift sign on the window glass. Private property, keep out. He knocked on the door several times. No one answered. He peered through a crack. The house was empty. The priest frowned. Something wasn't right. He walked to the corner and asked a neighbor, "Excuse me, have you seen Carol Peterson?" The woman looked at him sadly. Didn't you hear, Father? Her son came for her on Monday. He took her away. But they say it wasn't to care for her. It was to get rid of her. How? That's what they say. That he took her to the cemetery and left her there. Imagine. As if she were garbage. Poor woman. Eugene didn't wait any longer. He turned right around and went straight to Greenwood Cemetery. When he arrived, he found Roger sweeping dry leaves near the gate. "Roger, is Carol here?" Roger looked at him as if he had been expecting that question since the night before. "Yes, Father. She's here. Been here for 2 days." "What is she doing in a cemetery?" "Surviving." The priest didn't ask more. He followed him to the shed. He knocked on the door carefully. Carol opened it slowly, and seeing him, her face broke. The pain that had kept her contained loosened in a trembling sigh. "Father, daughter, what did they do to you?" She didn't answer. She just hugged him. Sitting inside, Carol told him everything. From the afternoon Robert took her to the cemetery, to the letter she had found, and the figure of the woman in the blue dress. Father Eugene listened without interrupting. He took the letter. He read it several times. Then he placed it on the table and said, "This is no coincidence. I know it." "Do you think it was her?" Carol lowered her gaze. "After so many years, I don't have the right to think so. But yes, I think it was Stella." Eugene shifted in his chair. His fingers drummed on his knee. Then he leaned toward her. "Carol, there's something I haven't told you." She looked up. "About 20 years ago, a woman came to the parish. Her name was Stella Peterson. She said she was looking for her sister. She told me her story, but when I asked for more details, she backed away. She said she had thought better of it, that she didn't want to stir up the past. She left and never came back." Carol pressed her lips together. "Why did you never tell me?" "Because she asked me not to. She begged me not to tell you about her. She said that she had forgiven you, but she didn't want to hurt you." Carol was silent, her mouth slightly open and her soul tangled up. "Do you think she's still alive?" Eugene didn't answer immediately. "I don't know, but if that letter is from her, something important is about to happen." "I never told Robert, Father, or anyone. What happened between Stella and me, I buried with time, and now that time has come to unearth it." The two remained silent. The priest looked at the ceiling, as if searching the sky for a sign. Carol closed her eyes for an instant. When she opened them again, she asked in a low voice, "Do you believe in divine justice?" "Yes," he said. "But I also believe that God sometimes uses the past to make us look at what we no longer want to see." At that moment, Roger gently knocked on the door. He held something covered with a handkerchief in his hand. "This was among the things your son left in the suitcase," he said. Carol took it. As she unwrapped it, she saw an old picture frame. The wood was splintered, the glass broken, but the photo inside was still distinguishable. Two girls, about 8 or 9 years old, one with braids, the other with loose hair and a faint smile. Carol held the portrait as if it were a relic. Her pulse quickened, and without anyone saying another word, the three understood that the story was far from over, and that this photo was just the beginning. The afternoon finished falling without asking permission. The shadows of the cemetery extended slowly, enveloping the crosses and headstones, as if wanting to cover the sins of the world with a blanket of silence. Inside the shed, Carol was still sitting in the same chair as hours ago, without changing her posture, with the picture frame in her hands and her eyes fixed on the childish faces of two girls who, at another time, had laughed together under the same roof. The photo was old, and although the glass was broken, The image was still there, intact in its essence. On the left, a girl with braids and a light-colored dress. On the right, another with a more serious expression, but with the same look of big eyes that still lived in Carol's mirror today. "Stella," she whispered, without realizing she had said the name out loud. Father Eugene slowly rose from where he was. He seemed tense, but he didn't want to pressure her. Roger, meanwhile, had gone out to get some coffee and a sweet roll to share. "Do you want to talk about her?" the priest asked softly. Carol shook her head. Not yet. Not with words, because there were things that hurt so much that neither the years nor confessions could lighten the load. When the silence grew thicker and the air grew colder, the priest approached the door. "I have to go. I'll be back early tomorrow. But please, rest. This place is not for a woman like you to live in, Carol. It's not fair." "Neither is living in a house where no one wants you," she replied without taking her eyes off the portrait. Eugene understood that he shouldn't insist. He left with slow steps, his back hunched, leaving Carol alone with her story. When the darkness was complete, Carol decided to lie down. Not on the cot. She couldn't. There were too many thoughts to lie down. So she returned to the stone bench where everything had begun. She wrapped herself in the blanket and sat under the faint light of a rusty lamppost. The cemetery at night is not scary. It's sad. The headstones don't scream. The dead don't walk. What weighs most heavily there are the memories, the recollections of those who mourn alone. Carol closed her eyes. But sleep didn't come calmly. It came suddenly, as if an inner door abruptly opened, dragging her towards something she had suppressed for decades. And she dreamt. She dreamt of a girl running through a field of sunflowers. She was dressed in blue, with loose hair and cheeks stained with dirt. She laughed. She laughed with a laugh so free it hurt. But suddenly the laughter stopped. The girl stopped, turned around, and her eyes fixed on Carol's. "Why did you leave me, Mum?" Carol woke up startled. Her chest burned. She put her hand to her heart. It took her a few seconds to recognize where she was. And at that moment, she felt she wasn't alone. She turned to her right. And there, in the distance, behind a tall tomb, she saw her again. The figure, the woman in blue, was not a dream. She was there, standing, watching her, not moving. Carol stood up as best she could, swaying. "Who are you?" she asked, without a voice. The figure didn't answer. She didn't move, but she didn't disappear like the last time either. Then Carol took a step, and another. She approached, despite the fear, despite the trembling in her legs. But when she reached the spot where the woman had been, there was no one. Only a flower. A single blue flower, placed on a headstone she didn't recognize. She bent down. She picked it up. And looking closer at the headstone, she read a name that took her breath away. Emily R. It said nothing more. No date of birth, nor of death. Just that name. The flower slipped from her fingers, and at that moment, a voice, whispered by the wind, brushed past her ear. "Not everything that is buried is dead." Carol backed away, breathing heavily. She put her hand to her mouth. Her heart was pounding with a force she hadn't felt since her youth, and she understood, deep in her soul, that the moment had arrived. The moment to speak, to remember, and to finally tell the truth. The truth she had kept locked away for so many years. The truth she could no longer silence. Carol didn't return to the shed that night. She stayed seated for hours next to the headstone with the name Emily R. on it, even though she knew that place was not hers. Or maybe it was. Because in that name, in those letters, carved in stone, there was not only an echo of what was, but a painful reflection of what she had hidden for too many years. She woke up with a sore back and dry eyes. She hadn't cried. She had no tears. What she felt was deeper, a mixture of remorse, fear, and nostalgia. She picked up the blue flower that was still resting next to the headstone and walked slowly toward the shed. Roger was already sweeping the entrance area, as he did every morning. "Where did you spend the night?" he asked when he saw her arrive with a pale face and icy hands. "Among the dead," she replied without irony. She went inside, sat in the wooden chair, and placed the flower on the table, next to the picture frame she still had. She looked at it for a moment in silence. Then, with trembling fingers, she opened the back of the photo, where a cardboard backing was usually hidden. There she found something she didn't remember putting there. A small folded note, yellowed with age, with childish handwriting. She unfolded it gently, like one touching a sacred relic. It read, "We promise never to separate. Even if the world breaks, we will always be two. Your sister forever, Stella." The paper fell onto the table. And that's when the memories began to rush out, as if someone had opened an internal floodgate that had been sealed for years. Carol and Stella were born 1 year apart. They grew up in a small town in upstate New York, surrounded by mountains, dust, and prayers. Their mother, Doris, was a seamstress, and their father, Sam, worked on a farm. They were poor, but united. Since they were children, Carol and Stella did everything together. They walked to school hand in hand, shared clothes, and slept in the same bed. If one got sick, the other wouldn't eat. If one cried, the other got up to comfort her. But between the two of them, there was an invisible difference that only adults perceived. Stella was sweeter, more sensitive, quieter. Carol was strong, decisive, fierce. Carol was loved for her character. Stella was cared for like fine crystal. At 14, Stella Feinthal began to fall in love. Carol noticed before anyone else. Once she saw her sitting under the tamarind tree, looking at the baker's son with silly eyes. And she didn't say anything. She just watched her. But as the months passed, Stella changed. She became more nervous, more withdrawn. She was sick often. She slept poorly. She lost her appetite. Carol knew it, even though no one told her, because sisters understand each other with a look. One night, Stella approached her bed and asked her not to say anything, that it was a mistake, that she wouldn't see him again, that everything was under control. Carol, for the first time in her life, kept a secret for her. The clearest memory of that time was the rain, a violent storm, one of those you don't forget. The tin roof vibrated as if it were about to fall. Their mother was sleeping. Their father wasn't home. He had gone to the next town for work. Stella doubled over on the floor, clutching her belly, crying silently. Carol held her, frightened. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice cracking. Stella didn't reply. She just placed Carol's hand on her belly. And Carol felt it. A lump. A movement. And her world came crashing down. Afterward, everything happened fast. An argument with their mother, a scandal in the town. Their father, furious. Stella was sent to live with a distant aunt, more than 5 hours away. They took her out of school. They forbade her to write. And Carol was left with the empty promise in her hands. She never heard from her again, until many years later. Roger entered the shed silently, carrying a steaming cup of coffee. "Everything all right?" he asked, noticing that Carol was lost in thought. the childish note in her hands. She looked up. "My sister was pregnant," she said, without preamble. Roger looked at her in surprise, but didn't interrupt. "I knew it. I knew it before anyone else. And I kept quiet. I thought everything would work out. I thought our family would handle it with love. But no, they threw her out. They silenced her. And I did nothing." She paused for a moment, then added, "I never saw her again. I didn't even know if the baby was born. I was only left with the doubt and the burden." Roger swallowed. "Do you think the woman you saw last night is her?" "I don't know, but something tells me that what I buried so many years ago is about to return." And as she said that, somewhere in the city, a name was being spoken for the first time in decades. A name that hadn't died. A name that was about to rise from the dust and change everything. The air in the shed was dense, not because of dust or confinement, but because of everything that floated in the atmosphere. Memories Carol hadn't wanted to name for more than 40 years. And now, there they were, falling over her like relentless rain. Roger had left for a while. Carol needed to be alone. She opened an old cardboard box that had been stored among her few belongings. Inside, wrinkled and smelling of dampness, were some school notebooks, a broken rosary, and a cloth bag embroidered with green thread. That bag was the last physical trace she had of her childhood in upstate New York. She opened it carefully, like one opening a wound. Among the small objects, she found something she didn't expect: a burnt button. Carol held it in the palm of her hand. It was dark brown, with an irregular edge melted by fire. And it was enough for everything to come back, all at once. She was 15 when it happened. It was the middle of summer, in the town of Harmony Creek, a small place with dirt streets and houses built with adobe and palm. At that time, her father, Sam, had argued with several neighbors over some land, and the tension in the town was evident. But that wasn't the worst. The night of the fire, Carol and Stella were sleeping together. Their mother had gone to a neighbor's wake, and their father was not home. Everything was silent. Until an explosion woke her up. The ceiling was cracking, smoke was already seeping through the cracks in the door. Carol got up suddenly, shook Stella, screamed her name, but her sister didn't react. She was pale, sweating. She had had a fever all afternoon and couldn't get up. "Stella, please wake up," she begged, pulling her hard. The heat was unbearable. The fire was already consuming the walls. Carol ran to look for water but found nothing more than an empty bucket. Outside, the neighbors began to shout. Desperation pushed. She couldn't carry her. Stella was taller than her and completely unconscious. She tried everything. She dragged her to the door, but the wood was already burning. It was at that moment that her mother appeared. She entered with a cloth over her face and dragged Carol out. "And your sister?" she screamed. "I couldn't get her out. I couldn't. She was burning." The next few minutes were confusing. The fire consumed the house almost completely. The men of the town tried to control the flames with buckets, shovels, and desperation, but it was useless. When the sun rose, only rubble remained. Nothing of Stella's body was found, only a piece of blue cloth and a button. That same button that Carol was now holding in her fingers so many years later. But the fire hadn't just taken a house. It had also taken a truth. Carol remembered her mother's face after the fire. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stroked her hair while telling her over and over, "What happened here stays here. Stella is with God, and you are alive. That's all that matters." The following days were silent. No one talked about what had happened. The town whispered, but no one confronted. The women looked at Carol with pity, the men with strangeness. And she, deep down, knew something wasn't right, because she never saw ashes. She never smelled death. She never heard a scream. Only the fire. Only the silence. Only that button. The memory shook her like an earthquake. Carol dropped the object and covered her face. Entire years had been built on a lie that was now beginning to crack. What if Stella hadn't died? What if someone had gotten her out before the house collapsed? And what if her mother's silence was, in reality, a pact to hide something much bigger? The letter she had found in the suitcase, the apparition in the cemetery, the name on the headstone. Everything was starting to take a shape that sent chills down her spine. She stood up. She was breathing heavily. She knew what she had to do. She had to go back to the beginning, to Harmony Creek, back where the fire started, back where the past was still alive, waiting to be unearthed. That morning, the sky over New York City dawned covered by a light fog that made the crosses of Greenwood Cemetery seem to float among the trees. Carol got up with a numb body, but with a firm decision fixed in her chest. She had to go back to Harmony Creek, back where everything broke, back where, perhaps, something was still alive. Before leaving the shed, she looked for Roger. "I'm going to the town where I was born," she told him bluntly. "And how do you plan to get there?" he asked, worried. "I don't know, but I have to do it. Something tells me that if I don't go back, I won't find peace." He didn't argue. He lent her some money, prepared her some bread and beans wrapped in napkins, and gave her a small backpack. Carol thanked him with teary eyes, as if she were saying goodbye forever. However, she hadn't taken 2 steps out of the cemetery when a familiar voice broke the air. "Carol." She turned, her heart in her mouth. It was Father Eugene, with a serious expression, carrying his briefcase and a small notebook in his hand. "I need to speak with you before you leave." "I can't waste time, Father. I have to go back to the past." "Precisely for that. If you are going to face the past, you must do so knowing everything. I didn't tell you something I discovered a few years ago, but didn't understand until now." They entered the shed again. Carol sat down. The priest opened his notebook and took out an old, wrinkled sheet of paper with a parish seal. "This sheet is from the baptismal registry of a girl who was baptized in 1982 in a rural chapel in upstate New York. Her full name was Emily Peterson Gonzalez." Carol gasped. "Peterson? My last name?" "Yes. And look who signed as the mother." The priest pointed to a name written in black ink, in cursive handwriting. Carol didn't need to read it twice. Stella Peterson. Her sister hadn't died. "And the father?" she asked, her voice trembling. Eugene shook his head. "It's not registered. But the strangest thing is that, according to the marginal note, Stella had expressly requested that this record be kept confidential, almost as if she wanted to hide it from the world, or from someone." Carol put a hand to her chest. "Then she was born. The girl was born, and she lived. According to the records, they moved several times. Upstate New York, upstate New Jersey, rural Connecticut, and then disappeared from the system completely." "And how did you get that sheet?" "It was years ago. A woman came to the parish. She didn't fully identify herself, but she asked me for guidance to find her biological mother. She said her aunt had recently died, and that before passing away, she had told her something that left her confused, that the woman who had raised her was not her mother." "Was it her?" Carol asked, almost without a voice. "I don't know. She didn't give me her name, but she left this copy and a list of questions she wanted to ask you. She begged me not to call you. that if you ever came looking for me, then I should show you everything. Carol closed her eyes. She felt a buzzing in her head. What did that list say? The priest searched his notebook, tore out a folded page, and handed it to her. Carol opened it. They were simple questions, but each one was a direct stab to the soul. Why did you leave me? Did you ever love me? Did you know I existed? Do you know I have your same face? Father, I didn't leave her, Carol whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. Then it's time to find her, and to tell her that yourself. Later, Carol sat alone on a bench inside the cemetery, with the list in one hand and the baptismal record in the other. She looked at the sky with a mixture of fear and hope. Her niece's name, or daughter as some would say, was no longer a ghost. She was a real person, a woman who perhaps was still alive, a woman who perhaps was still looking for her. And at that moment, in the middle of her silence, she heard a murmur behind her that made her turn her head. "Are you all right, Ma'am?" It was a young woman, with long hair, carrying flowers in her hands. She wasn't more than 20 years old. Carol looked at her, confused. The girl smiled without knowing the earthquake she had just caused. "I've come to visit my grandmother. She's right nearby. I always come alone. But today I felt I should bring her blue flowers. Do you like them?" Carol swallowed. "Yes, they are beautiful." The young woman said goodbye with a kind gesture and walked away among the graves. Carol followed her with her gaze, and when she saw her kneel next to the headstone of Emily R., her heart stopped. It wasn't her. It couldn't be her. Or yes. The resemblance, the tone of voice, the blue flower. Carol felt something inside her begin to crack. And for the first time in decades, she felt a terrifying mixture of joy, shame, and need. The need to know, to confirm, to speak, and to say her name out loud, the one she had been forbidden to pronounce for so many years. The silence of the cemetery was filled again with echoes, but not of death. Instead, of something deeper, of secrets that refused to remain buried. Carol, sitting alone in front of Emily R.'s headstone, couldn't take her eyes off the young woman she had just seen. The girl had already left, unaware that her face had just opened an abyss in the heart of a woman marked by the most difficult decisions of her life. That afternoon, Carol didn't want to talk to anyone. She didn't say anything to Roger or Father Eugene. She kept everything inside her, as she always had, as she had learned since childhood, to keep quiet, to endure, to hold on. But Father Eugene, who had witnessed so many human stories, knew that something inside her was breaking. That very night, he went to look for her. He found her in the shed, sitting in the dark, with the rosary in one hand and a lost look in her eyes. "Father," she said without looking at him, "if I don't tell you now, maybe I'll never do it." Eugene sat in silence opposite her without interrupting. "I raised a girl who wasn't mine, a girl who was left with me as if she were a dirty secret. No one knew, not Robert, not the neighborhood, not you, no one." The priest nodded slowly, as if this only confirmed something he already suspected. "And was that girl Emily?" he asked. Carol took a deep breath. "Yes." Eugene didn't respond. He just closed his eyes and leaned his head against the wall. "That changes everything," he whispered. "Why do you say that?" The priest sat up and took a small leather folder from inside his briefcase. He placed it on the table and, with trembling hands, pulled out a yellowish sheet of paper. "I also have something I never told you, something I swore to keep confidential, until I felt the time was right." Carol looked at him intently. Her fingers tightened around the rosary. "A few years ago, when that woman came looking for you," the priest said, "she left something else. Besides the baptismal record and the list of questions, she left this." He handed her the sheet. It was a letter. "Father Eugene, if Carol Peterson ever comes looking for me, tell her I don't hate her. Tell her I understood. Too late. Tell her I'm not looking for a mother. I'm looking for a truth. But please, don't tell her who I am. If she recognizes me, let her do it by looking me in the eyes. And if she doesn't, then let me go in peace." Carol felt a lump in her throat she couldn't swallow. It was so obvious, so simple, so devastating. "How long has it been since you received this letter?" 3 years. Maybe a little more. Since then, I've been waiting for the moment you would come to me. What I didn't know was that time would be so cruel to both of you." Carol stood up, unable to stay seated with so much weight on her back. "And you never thought of telling me anything?" "I didn't have the right," the priest replied, firm but hurt. "That young woman asked me for silence. She looked at me with eyes full of confusion, but also with such broken hope that I knew forcing things would only cause more damage. You weren't ready. Neither was she." "And now?" Eugene shrugged. "Now I don't know. But if that young woman you saw today among the tombs is who I think she is, then time won't stop anymore. You have to speak. You have to say her name." Carol didn't reply. She took a step toward the door, and then another. But before leaving, she stopped. She looked at the priest with an expression that mixed fear with the courage of a mother who had once held life in arms that weren't hers. "When I held her in my arms, she was so tiny. She had dark skin like Stella and big eyes like mine. She didn't cry much, but she did look at me. She looked at me as if she knew I wasn't her mother, but that she still needed me." The priest looked down, touched by the confession. "And why did you give her away?" he asked in a low voice. "I didn't give her away. She was taken from me." Eugene frowned. "Who?" Carol hesitated. "A woman. A trusted neighbor. They convinced me I couldn't keep her, that it was a sin, that people would start talking, that she would be pointed out as a child of sin. They took her while I was sleeping, and I never knew anything more about her." Eugene closed his eyes, as if a piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place. "Carol, there's something else you need to know." He looked her straight in the eyes. "That neighbor, the one who convinced you to give up Emily, was none other than Susan's mother." The impact was sharp. Carol froze. "What are you saying?" "Susan grew up hearing that story. She grew up believing that Emily was a shame to the family, that you had failed, that you were a bad woman. That's why she always scorned you. That's why she poisoned Robert against you. Because she didn't just hate you, she feared you." Carol clenched her fists. "So Susan knew the whole time?" Eugene nodded very slowly. "And if Susan knew it, then I wouldn't be surprised if she did something else." Carol looked at the letter again. Her pulse was steady. There was no more room for doubt. "Father, I think it's time to find her. And it doesn't matter if she hates me, if she doesn't recognize me, if she doesn't want to see me. I need to know if Emily is alive, and I need to ask her for forgiveness." Father Eugene didn't say anything more. He just handed her a handwritten name and address, a clue, a possibility. And Carol knew, without needing confirmation, that she was about to reunite with the biggest mistake of her life. One who walked with a face of her own, one who perhaps had already looked her in the eyes without knowing who she really was. The handwritten address on the paper Father Eugene gave Carol was clear, although somewhat worn with time. It read, Pine Street, number 46, St. Anthony neighborhood, upstate New York. There was no phone number, no full name, no clue other than that. Carol spent that night without closing her eyes. It wasn't just the insomnia common in old age, nor the cold seeping through the cracks in the shed. It was the feeling that something very big was about to change, as if the world, after years of being on pause, was finally beginning to move. At dawn, she sat down in front of a cup of coffee Roger prepared for her, and without lifting her gaze from the dark liquid, she said in a low voice, I'm going to upstate New York. Roger didn't stop her. He just offered to take her to the bus terminal. During the ride in the old caretaker's car, Carol kept her hands on her lap, clutching the paper as if it were a direct ticket to the past. She didn't speak anymore. It wasn't necessary. The decision had already been made. The bus left mid-morning. The journey lasted several hours. They passed dry fields, forgotten towns, dilapidated signs, and empty stations. But Carol wasn't paying attention to any of it. Her gaze was fixed on the window, but she wasn't seeing the landscape. She was seeing other things. Stella's eyes, the cries of a baby wrapped in blankets, Susan's face shouting meddler at her in the kitchen, and the eyes of a young woman in the cemetery, placing blue flowers without knowing who that grave belonged to. She arrived in upstate New York at sunset. She took a taxi, the address in her trembling hand. The driver was a young man with a poorly trimmed beard, who immediately noticed that the woman who had just gotten in wasn't on vacation. First time here? He asked, trying to break the ice. First time I've had the courage to come, she replied without looking at him. The taxi stopped in front of a modest house with a cream-colored facade and a black wrought-iron gate. The walls were a little faded, but the garden was well maintained. There were geraniums in hanging pots and a child's bicycle leaning against the fence. Carol got out of the car as if her legs weighed twice as much. She walked to the gate. She knocked once, twice. She waited. No one answered. Maybe she's not home, she murmured. She was about to leave when she heard footsteps approaching. From the end of the hallway, an older woman in her late 60s appeared, wearing a cotton robe and her hair tied up in a messy bun. Are you looking for someone? She asked, peering out. Yes, excuse the bother. Does Emily live here? The woman frowned. Who's asking? Carol hesitated. She didn't know what to say. She couldn't say her mother, nor her aunt, so she opted for an honest but incomplete answer. My name is Carol Peterson. I just need to talk to her. I don't want to cause any trouble. The woman studied her for a few more seconds. Then she nodded and disappeared inside. Carol felt like she couldn't breathe. A couple of minutes later, the door opened. And there she was. The young woman, the same one from the cemetery, without flowers, without a shadow, face to face. She was wearing a light blue blouse and denim jeans. Her hair was pulled back in a long braid that fell over one shoulder. Her eyes were large, dark, and when they met Carol's, there was a silence so profound it seemed to stop time. Emily didn't say anything. She didn't smile either. Do we know each other? She asked, with a serene, almost cautious voice. Carol swallowed. Her throat was dry, her hands cold, her heart pounding in her ears. I saw you at the cemetery, she managed to say. Are you the lady who was next to the grave? Carol nodded. Yes, I didn't know if it was you. Emily narrowed her eyes. Who? Me? The question was simple, the answer devastating. Carol felt her whole body tremble, and without thinking any further, She finally said what she had hidden for decades. I am Carol Peterson, Stella's sister, and you are my niece. Or you were, or you still are. I don't know. Emily's face didn't change. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't fall to the ground. She just looked at her for a long time. Then she lowered her gaze and said, Then it was true. What was true? Everything she wrote in her diary. Carol froze. Diary? Emily nodded softly. Yes, my mother's. I found it 3 years ago. She had kept it as if it were a treasure. She wrote about you in it, about how she looked for you, about how you rejected her, about how you took everything she had. Carol took a step back. It wasn't like that. Not completely, maybe, but it doesn't matter now. Why? Emily looked up. This time her eyes were filled with something more than distance. They were filled with pain. Because she died believing that you hated her. The blow was sharp. Carol felt like she couldn't breathe. She held onto the gate frame to keep from falling. She died? 3 years ago, in a hospital bed in upstate New York, she took my hand and told me, if you ever see Carol, tell her I don't hate her, but that I never understood why she hurt me so much. Carol couldn't hold it in. She covered her face with her hands. Tears began to flow, without stopping. I didn't know she was alive. I know. I didn't come here for answers, just for peace. Emily took a step back, as if she didn't want to listen anymore. Thank you for coming, Carol. But I don't know if I have anything more to say. She was about to close the door, but she stopped. Just one thing. If I looked for you, it wasn't to find a mother. It was to understand who I am. And today, finally, I understood. She closed the gate gently. Carol didn't move. She couldn't. She stayed there, under the upstate New York sky, her feet rooted to the ground and her soul broken inside. And in her mind, a single word echoed: forgiveness. But she no longer knew if she was still in time to ask for it, or if that truth, which had finally come to light, had arrived too late. The bus back to New York City moved slowly on the highway, winding between hills and dry farmlands. Carol sat next to the window, her gaze fixed on a non-existent point in the landscape. She had no luggage, only a constant idea, like a needle sticking in her chest with every breath. Emily hadn't forgiven her. She hadn't expected hugs or tears. But a part of her, naively, believed that the encounter would change something, that the truth, even if late, would serve to mend things. But no. Emily didn't scream, didn't judge, and perhaps that was the most painful part. That resigned calm, that it doesn't matter anymore, that thank you for coming, but I don't want to know more. That night, when she arrived at Greenwood Cemetery, Roger was already waiting for her. He helped her get out of the taxi, offered her hot coffee, but Carol barely spoke to him. She just asked for a blanket and locked herself in the shed. 2 days passed. She didn't leave. She barely ate. She slept little. Roger, worried, went to see Father Eugene. And on the 3rd day, both came to talk to her. Carol, the priest said firmly, you can't stay locked up here. You took an important step, but this is not over. For me, it is, she replied from her cot. Emily is alive and doesn't want anything to do with me. What more can I do? Tell the truth, Eugene insisted. Not just to her, but to Robert, to everyone. You have nothing left to lose. And what if I lose the little I have left? You can't lose what was already taken from you years ago. Carol closed her eyes. There was something she still hadn't said, a thought that had grown inside her like a bitter root. Susan knew, from the beginning. The priest and Roger exchanged a look. How can you be so sure? Eugene asked. Because Susan's mother was the one who took Emily, I'm sure. She handed her over. And Susan grew up with that story. She hated me because of it. She judged me in silence for years. And now I wouldn't be surprised if she knew Emily was alive and was trying to prevent any reconciliation. Eugene frowned. Do you think she could do something against Emily? I don't know. But if she knew all this time, then she also knew that I made a will. Roger suddenly raised his head. A will? Yes, Carol said. Years ago, when Emily was just a girl, I signed it in secret, with the help of a friend who worked at a notary office. I left my house and the little I own in her name. And where is that will? In a sealed envelope that I left with that friend. I only asked her not to open it until I died. But years later, when Susan found out I had gone to see her to renew the papers, she disappeared for 2 days. I never knew where she went. And when she returned, I learned that the friend had been fired and the notary office had been transferred. Roger snorted, annoyed. Susan moved everything to destroy it. I think so. There was a tense silence. Father Eugene, who had seen many stories, understood that Susan was not just a difficult daughter-in-law. She was a woman who had woven a plan for years, with poisonous patience, to erase Carol and anyone who might take what she believed she deserved from the map. That afternoon, while Roger went out to buy medicine, Carol and Eugene were left alone in the shed. That's when someone knocked hard on the door. Carol Peterson, a female voice shouted from the other side. I know you're in there. Both looked at each other. Carol slowly stood up and opened the door. There stood Susan, furious, with a pale face and eyes burning with rage. You have no shame. You dared to look for her, to look for that damned bastard child, she shouted. Susan, lower your voice, Eugene tried to calm her. No, Father, this is over. I warned Robert. I told him if she got involved in our lives again, everything would go to hell. And it's already started. Or do you think I didn't know you went to upstate New York? Carol didn't say anything, but her eyes were not the same as before. There was no fear. There was determination. I don't have to hide anymore, she said firmly. Emily is Stella's daughter. She is my own blood. And you built a life on a lie. Susan laughed scornfully. A lie? You had nothing when we arrived. That house was a ruin. I raised Robert up. I pushed him to get ahead. And you tied him down with your guilt, with your emotional blackmail. Eugene stepped forward. Susan, for your own good, step away. Susan looked at him mockingly. And if I don't? What are you going to do, little priest? We are no longer in a time to silence the truth. Susan pressed her lips together. Then she turned back to Carol. If you dare to continue, I swear you will regret it. Don't mess with what doesn't belong to you. Robert is mine. His life is mine. His future, too. And without saying more, she turned around and left. Carol closed the door. Her hands were trembling, but something inside her had awakened. Father, she said in a low voice, I want to go to the notary office. Which one? The new one. The one that was set up after Susan moved everything. What for? I want to know if there's still a trace of that will. Because if she destroyed it, I want to make a new one. And this time no one will hide it. This time I will sign it in front of everyone, including Robert. The next morning dawned murky. A dense fog covered the paths of Greenwood Cemetery, and the humid air seemed to want to stagnate in every corner. Carol, dressed in her worn grey sweater, left the shed with determined steps. She was no longer the fragile woman who had been abandoned there a few days earlier. Something had changed. Maybe it was anger, maybe the truth, or maybe the certainty that she had nothing left to fear. Roger was waiting for her with the engine of his old car running. They were heading downtown, to the notary office where the new firm was operating, which, according to Carol, had been installed after the original will disappeared. "Are you sure this is the same notary office?" Roger asked, as they stopped in front of a modern building of glass and marble, very different from the old office where Carol had made her will years ago. "No," she replied, "but whoever replaced it has what belongs to me." They went in. Carol explained to the receptionist what she was looking for, her full name, the estimated year she signed the will, and the name of the original notary, Ms. Julia Marshall. The young man typed on the computer for a few minutes. Then he frowned and said, "There is no file with your name here. There are no records of Ms. Marshall either." "What do you mean there are no records?" Roger said, irritated. "What kind of notary office is this?" "I'm sorry, sir, but according to the Department of State documents, this office only opened 5 years ago. Before that, the premises were closed for more than a decade. There are no files prior to that date." Carol felt her blood run cold. "And is there no digital backup? A copy? A log?" "No. The archives were most likely lost or destroyed when the property was transferred." They left without saying a word. Once outside, Carol sat on a bench in the plaza in front of the notary office. She looked at the overcast sky, while cars drove by indifferently on the avenue. "Did she destroy everything?" she finally said. "Susan made sure to erase my will with the same coldness with which she erased me from Robert's life." Roger, who had known her since she was young, looked at her with renewed respect. Carol wasn't crying. She was just clenching her teeth, as if there was something stronger than sadness inside her. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "What I didn't do before," she replied. "I'm going to sign a new will, but this time I won't keep it a secret." That same afternoon, with the help of Father Eugene, who knew the current notary because he had handled paperwork for the parish, Carol drafted a new document. Clearer, more direct, more definitive. She wrote that the house in the Lower East Side, the only asset she owned, would become the property of Emily Peterson Gonzalez, her sister Stella's daughter. This was in recognition not only of the shared blood, but of everything that was denied to her because of fear and silence. The notary, surprised by the story behind the case, offered to archive 2 physical copies and 1 digital copy, with notarial backing and an electronic signature. Eugene was one witness, Roger the second. Before signing, Carol asked to read the document aloud. Her voice trembled, but every word came out with the firmness of someone who has carried the weight of the world and no longer intends to remain silent. "I declare, by my free and conscious will, that this decision represents not an act of charity, but of justice. Because sometimes love is mistaken, but the truth is not." When she finished signing, she leaned back against the chair. The silence in the office was thick. "Now I'm ready," she said in a low voice. "Let whoever needs to come, come. I am ready." That night, as they were returning to the cemetery, Carol and Roger stopped at a small bakery to buy some sweet rolls. The atmosphere was calm. The smell of freshly baked pastries gave Carol a small sense of peace. For a moment, she believed that everything had been worth it. But upon arriving at the shed, something wasn't right. The door was ajar. They entered cautiously. Nothing was missing, except for an envelope. On top of the table, where Carol kept her personal papers, there was a printed sheet with computer-typed text, unsigned. Don't get your hopes up. Even if you sign 1,000 times, Robert will never honor your will. What you couldn't achieve in life, you won't achieve when you're dead. Leave, Carol, before we erase you again. Carol read it without surprise. Susan, are you sure? Who else? Roger picked up the paper and tore it. We're not going to let this stand. But Carol didn't reply. She sat on the edge of the cot, looking at the empty wall. No, Roger, it's not going to stand. Robert has to know the truth. I can't protect him anymore. I shouldn't. He has to hear from my mouth who Emily is and who Susan is. Roger nodded. And how do you plan to do that? Carol looked up, for the first time with fire in her eyes. I'm going to find him, and I'm going to tell him everything, face to face. And if he doesn't want to listen to me, I'll tell him in front of everyone. That sunrise in New York City did not bring light, but omens. The sky was overcast, and a very fine drizzle covered the windshields of the parked cars. Father Eugene had summoned Carol and Roger to the parish. The news he brought, though brief, compelled him to speak urgently. I saw her, he said as soon as Carol crossed the door. Emily is back. She was in the church this morning. Roger's eyes widened, surprised. Here, in this parish? Yes. She didn't come for me or for you. She arrived early, very discreetly, in a blue jacket. She lit a candle and sat in the last pew for almost an hour. No one bothered her. Then she approached and asked about you, Carol. Carol felt something stir in her chest. And what did you tell her? Only the truth. That you were still here, that you hadn't given up, and that you were still waiting to look her in the eyes without fear. And what did she say? The priest looked at her gently. Nothing. She nodded. But there was a storm in her eyes, and before leaving, she gave me this. He took a sealed envelope from his cassock pocket, without a return address, without a stamp. It only said, in black ink, for Carol. She received it in silence, her hands trembling. She didn't open it immediately. She brought it to her chest, held it against her heart, and for a moment said nothing. What do you plan to do? Roger asked. What I must, she replied. Open it and listen to her. That same afternoon, Carol returned to the shed. She lit a candle, sat next to the wooden table, and carefully broke the seal on the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten sheet with firm, neat handwriting. I don't know if this letter will help. I don't know if what I feel inside can be said with words, but if you receive it, it's because I decided to try. I don't hate you. That is the simplest truth I have for you. But I also don't know if I can forgive you. Because I grew up looking for a face that never appeared. Because my mother died with questions that you should have answered. And because, even though I know who I am today, I still don't know who you were. I'll be leaving for a few days. I don't know where. But when I return, I hope to find you with an open heart. Because mine, finally, is starting to heal. Emily. Carol closed her eyes. The words were not sweet, nor soft, nor full of reconciliation. But they were sincere. And that, for a woman like her, was more valuable than any empty promise. She read it 3 times, and on the 3rd time, she cried. She cried in silence, like mothers who were once abandoned daughters cry. She cried for Stella, for Emily, for herself, for the lost years, for the arms that never embraced, for the words she never said, and for the ones she said too late. That night, Roger found her asleep on the table, the letter still in her fingers. The next day, as Carol helped sweep one of the side areas of the cemetery, A familiar figure appeared at the main gate. Robert. He was alone, with a pale face, dishevelled hair, and eyes filled with something Carol couldn't identify at first. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't anger. It was disorientation, as if finally, after years of believing he was right, he was beginning to question everything. "Mum," he said, his voice barely audible. Carol let the broom drop. "Robert, I need to talk to you." Roger, watching them from a distance, understood he shouldn't intervene. "Why did you come back?" Carol asked. "Susan found out about the will. She read it. I don't know how, but she went crazy. She told me you were giving everything away to a bastard." Robert used the term with shame. "I didn't understand anything. She yelled at me. She blamed me. She told me you had betrayed me, and then I realized something." "What?" "That all my life I've listened more to others than to you." Carol didn't reply. She just observed him. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive," he added, "but I am ready to understand, and I want you to tell me the truth. Everything." She nodded calmly. "I will, but not now." "Why?" "Because first you need to see with your own eyes what you were always denying, and that truth won't be told by me. She will tell you." Robert frowned. "Emily? Yes, where is she?" Carol smiled faintly. "She will be back soon, but she won't come for me. She will come for something you also deserve to know. And when that happens, Robert, nothing in your life will ever be the same." The sound of the parish bells announced 6 in the evening. The sky was beginning to turn orange, and in Greenwood Cemetery, the wind blew with a different force, as if announcing that something was about to shift deep within that story that had remained in the shadows for years. Robert and Carol were still sitting in the shed, face to face, in silence. It wasn't a tense silence, but one charged with expectation. He had come looking for answers. She, with her entire past weighing on her, didn't know where to start. Until someone knocked on the door. It was Father Eugene, and with him, Emily. Robert stood up when he saw her. He had spent so many years without knowing he had a sister, that now, having her in front of him, forced him to reevaluate every childhood memory. Emily didn't look at him with resentment, only with a distant calm, the kind that only comes after much contained pain. "May I come in?" she asked. Carol nodded. "Thank you for coming back." "I'm not here for you," Emily replied. "I'm here for her." She took a thick notebook, bound in cloth, from her bag. She placed it on the table delicately, as if carrying something fragile. "This diary belonged to my mother, Stella." Robert swallowed. Carol reached out her hand, but Emily didn't let go immediately. "You will read it, yes. But first, I want him to hear it," she said, pointing to Robert. "He needs to know who his mother really was and who his aunt was." Robert didn't dare to sit down. "I don't know if I want to hear that," he said, uncomfortable. "Well, you should," Emily replied, "because your mother was many things, but above all, she was a coward." Carol closed her eyes, not to avoid the blow, but to receive it head-on. Emily opened the notebook in the middle and began to read aloud. September, 1982. "I dreamt of Carol today. I dreamt she hugged me, that she told me everything would be all right. But I woke up alone, and I knew that hug would never come. I don't know if she hates me, if she fears me, or if she simply couldn't forgive me. All I know is that when I went looking for her, she didn't open the door for me. She turned her face away, and I knew that, for her, I was dead. But I don't care, because I have Emily, my girl, the one I hold in my arms as the last piece of dignity I have left." Robert lowered his head. Emily turned to another page. February 1986. Emily asks about her aunt. She doesn't know that aunt is actually the woman who took away my chance to raise her with her family. Carol was afraid. I understand, but I don't justify her. I gave her all my love during that visit. I showed her the photos. I told her I had changed, that I was only looking for her forgiveness. And she told me to leave, not to come back that night. I cried with my daughter in my arms, and I promised her that one day, when she knew the truth, she wouldn't hate her mother, but the person who hid it from her. Carol pressed her lips together in silence. There was no possible defense, no excuse. She had done it. She rejected her. She let fear defeat her. Robert didn't say anything. His face was hard, but his eyes were trembling. Emily closed the diary. That's just one part. There's much more. Whole pages filled with pain, hunger, fear, struggle. My mother wasn't perfect, but she didn't give up. She cared for me fiercely. She gave me everything she could. And every night she talked about you, Carol, as if she were still waiting for you. Carol looked up. And she was. I know she was. But when she came back, I was different. I was married, with a small child, and a daughter-in-law who was already beginning to sow poison. I was afraid, Emily, afraid that her return would tear down everything I had built, and out of cowardice, I pushed her away. Robert finally spoke. And me? Why did you never tell me? Because you were a child, son, and then you were a man, and you became deaf, and I grew old, and I didn't find the right time. Robert stood up. And you think now is the right time? No, Carol replied with dignity. It's too late. But even so, I don't want to leave without you knowing everything. Father Eugene, who had remained silent, approached. Robert, there are things you have to hear even if they hurt, because if you don't, your conscience will do it for the rest of your life. Robert looked at her. Then he looked at Emily. And for the first time, he lowered his guard. Then tell me everything, Mum. Everything you never said. Because if I'm going to judge you, I want to do it knowing the truth. Carol took a deep breath. She took the diary in her hands, and with a voice broken by the years, but firmer than ever, she said, It all began in upstate New York, with a scared girl, a pregnant sister, and a lie that changed everything. And without realizing it, that was the first time the three of them sat together. Broken, yes, but family nonetheless. About to discover that the truth, even if it burns, can also heal. Robert remained seated opposite his mother and Emily, but his thoughts weren't entirely there. The words he had just heard, read from the diary of a woman he never knew, but now knew was his aunt, had shaken him to his core. With every sentence written by Stella, something inside him broke, and something else was revealed. The account was clear, sincere, painful, and above all, too close. He had spent his whole life believing he knew who he was. An only child, raised with deprivation, with rigidity, with silences. Now, suddenly he discovered that he had grown up under an incomplete, mutilated story, and that his own mother had been capable of hiding the most important chapter of his origin from him. Emily wasn't speaking. She remained firm, with her arms crossed, looking at Robert as if analyzing him with every breath. He felt her distant, but also familiar. There was something in the way she held his gaze that reminded him of someone, and that's when he understood. Her eyes, he whispered. Carol heard him and frowned. What did you say? Her eyes. Robert looked directly at Emily. They are yours, and the way she crosses her arms, and how she wrinkles her nose when she's annoyed. I hadn't realized it until now. But you look like Mum. Carol lowered her head. Emily maintained her hard expression, but her eyes just barely glistened. Robert stood up. He walked around the shed, pacing. His breathing became more and more agitated, as if the weight of the revelations left no space in his chest. "How old are you?" he suddenly asked Emily. 38? Robert closed his eyes. He did some quick math. The numbers fit. They fit the silences, the absences, the times he heard Stella's name in whispers that stopped when he entered the room. "Once," he began to say, more to himself than to the others, "I was about 8 years old. I was looking for pencils in the old wardrobe, and I found a box. Inside there were photos, clippings, letters." He stopped. Carol watched him with increasing tension. "There was a picture of you, Mum, with a girl with braids, a girl who wasn't me." Emily slowly sat up. "What did you do with that box?" "I took it to you," he replied without looking at her. "I asked you who that girl was. Do you remember?" Carol took a few seconds to answer. "I said she was a cousin." "No," Robert corrected her with a firm voice. "You said, 'She's just a girl from the town that I took care of for a while.'" Carol nodded sadly. "And I put it away again. I hid it." "No," Robert interrupted. "You burned it." Carol squeezed her eyes shut. She hadn't forgotten it. She had only buried the memory. "I got scared. I thought you were going to ask me more questions." "Well, of course I was going to ask more questions. I was 8 years old." Robert raised his voice, but his anger wasn't violent. It was the anger of someone who realizes that what was hidden from him was also a part of his identity. Emily watched him without saying anything. Robert sat down again. He ran his hands over his face. And then, with a calmer voice, he asked, "Who am I? Mum?" Carol took a moment to answer. "You are my son. And Emily?" "She is my niece. But for a time, she was also my daughter." Robert closed his eyes. "And what was I to you then? A shield? An excuse?" "You were my everything," she replied without hesitation. "But I was wrong. I wanted to protect you from a story I thought would hurt you, without realizing that the real damage was hiding it from you." There was a long silence. Emily lowered her gaze. Robert remained still, processing, until he finally broke the silence with a question no one expected. "Why did you never look for her again? After rejecting her, why didn't you try to make amends?" Carol didn't know what to say. "Were you so afraid that she would forgive you?" Those words pierced Carol like a knife. Emily turned her face toward him, surprised. That question wasn't for her, but it touched her all the same. I didn't know if she was still alive. I never heard anything more about Stella. After that day, no one in the town ever mentioned her again. And I convinced myself that the best thing was to move on, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't existed." "But she did exist," Emily said. "And so did I." Robert looked at her with more attention, more curiosity, more compassion. "What did you do all this time?" he asked her. "I grew up, I survived, I worked since I was 15. I became a mother before I was a daughter. And I became a woman without answers until I found the diary, and I knew who I was." Robert sighed. "And why did you come back?" "Because I didn't want to die with the same doubts as my mother. Because I deserve to know where I come from. And because, even though I've been broken, I still want to understand." Robert looked into her eyes, and for the first time, he didn't see a stranger. He saw something more. He saw blood. He saw history. He saw family. Carol slowly stood up, tears in her eyes. If you two are ready, I am too. It's time to go home. And open that room, the one that's been closed since Stella disappeared. Robert frowned. What room? The one no one has set foot in for 40 years, and which holds everything I couldn't face. The rain began to fall heavily over New York City that same night. The sound of the drops hitting the shed's tin roof accompanied the silence that had settled between the three of them. Carol, sitting on the edge of her cot, kept her hands clasped over her knees. Robert, standing by the door, kept looking at the floor. Emily, with her arms crossed, observed the old portraits hanging on the wall, as if waiting to hear a voice from the past that would explain everything. I want to open that room, Carol finally said. But I need to go to the place where everything began. Robert looked up. What place? Harmony Creek, she replied without hesitation. The town where Stella and I were born, where the fire happened. Emily turned around. Do you think there's anything there? I don't know, but it's where I lost her, where I buried a truth I didn't dare to look at head on. And if we're going to open that room, I want to do it with everything clear. Robert hesitated. What if no one's left? What if we're just stirring up ashes? Ashes hold the truth too, son. And I need it. 3 days later, the three of them got into Roger's old car, heading toward upstate New York. It was a long trip, and the road, despite the paved advancements, seemed not to have changed in 40 years. The landscape was the same. Arid hills, earth-colored houses, makeshift fruit stands, and roads with chickens crossing without haste. No one spoke much. Carol looked out the window as if trying to recognize the route of her childhood. Emily was in the back seat, with a notebook in her hand, her mother's diary. Robert drove, his face tense, gripping the steering wheel more than necessary. They arrived in Harmony Creek as dusk fell. It was a small town, quieter than Carol remembered. The mud houses and the mill where her father worked were gone, but the church was still there, firm, with the rusted bell and the cross leaning as if it too carried the weight of the years. There, Carol exclaimed, pointing to a ruined structure in the distance. That was our house. They got out of the car. The wind blew strongly, lifting red dust. They walked to the lot. Only black stones, a half-demolished wall, and rusted nails sticking out of the ground remained. Robert looked around. There's nothing here, Mom. Not physically, she said. But this carry inside. She approached the wall and ran her hand over it, stroking the concrete as if she were touching a grave. Stella and I slept here together, embracing, dreaming of leaving this place, of going to the city, of having another life. Emily slowly approached. How did the fire happen? It was at night, Carol whispered. Stella was sick. She had a fever. I was taking care of her. Suddenly I smelled smoke. The roof was burning. I wanted to get her out, but I couldn't. Robert approached her. And how are you so sure she died here? Carol was silent. Then she lowered her gaze. Because they told me so. Because I never saw her again. Because no one explained anything to me. They just told me, don't ask any more questions. Robert frowned. Who told you? My mother, and Miss Jackie, the neighbor next door. She was the one who helped cover everything up. The same one who years later became Susan's mother-in-law. Emily narrowed her eyes. Are you saying Susan's family has something to do with this? Carol nodded slowly. That woman was the one who separated me from you. She was the one who convinced my mother that she should hide Stella's pregnancy. And then, when we thought Stella had died, she showed up with a solution. That the girl would be a problem if she stayed with me, that she should leave, that it wasn't a good idea to mix the family lines. Robert walked a few steps away, as if needing distance to think. So, Susan knew since she was a child. I don't have proof, Carol said, but I'm sure that story passed from mouth to mouth within that family. And when Susan married you, she already knew everything. She knew who Emily was. She knew who Stella was. She knew everything I struggled to bury. Robert took a deep breath. The wind swirled dry leaves around his feet. Emily bent down and picked up a small stone, black from the old fire. So it's not just about what you did, Carol, she said, looking at the stone. It's about everything they forced you to keep quiet. The silence of others. Carol nodded. Her eyes were moist, but she wasn't crying. That's why I came. Not to find rubble, but to reclaim my voice. Robert approached her. He took her hand. Let's go home, he told her. It's time to open that room. Emily put the stone in her bag, as a symbol, a memory. They got back in the car. On the way back to the city, the landscape didn't look different. But inside the car, something had changed. That room, closed for decades, awaited them. And behind its door, there was more than dust. There were photographs, letters, lies, and a final truth that no one was prepared to read. The return to New York City was silent, but not uncomfortable. Carol sat in the back seat of the car, her forehead resting against the glass. Her eyes were still fixed on the horizon, but she wasn't seeing the landscape. What she saw was her sister's face, just as she remembered it the last time she was face to face with her, with pleading eyes, a child in her arms, and a heart broken in two. Robert drove without haste, both hands on the steering wheel, as if afraid that any deviation would lead him back to the lie. Emily, sitting next to him, remained silent. There was a mixture of restlessness and tenderness in her, her eyes occasionally fixed on Carol through the rearview mirror, trying to decipher her. None of the three knew that upon arrival, something awaited them that would change the course of everything. Hours later, crossing the main door of the house in the Lower East Side, the air enveloped them with a smell of confinement, dust, and suspended memories. The dwelling remained almost intact since the last time Carol set foot in it. The entrance hall, with framed portraits of deceased relatives, the dining room with the wooden table where they had eaten in silence so many times, and at the end of the hallway, that door, the one to the room that had been closed for more than 40 years. Robert stopped in front of it. "Are you sure?" he asked his mother. Carol nodded. More than ever. The lock was rusty. Carol took a tiny key from her bag. Her hands trembling slightly, she put it into the lock. A dry click sounded. The door opened with a soft creak, almost like a whisper saying, "Welcome." Dust covered everything. The air was dense, but untouched. Inside, in that forgotten room, was the past. An empty crib, a rocking chair, a blanket folded over the backrest, and a wooden box Carol immediately recognized. "That box," Emily murmured. "It's yours," Carol said. "I kept your things in there. I hid them when they told me they had taken you far away." Robert knelt down. He opened the lid carefully. Inside were a pair of tiny shoes, a bib embroidered with the letters ER, a rag doll with a missing button for an eye, and a letter sealed with red wax. "What is this?" Robert asked, picking up the letter. Carol didn't recognize it. "It's not mine." Robert carefully broke the seal. The envelope was old, but the ink was still legible. He read aloud, "Carol, if you ever dare to open this room and find this letter, it's because something inside you has awakened. I don't hate you. I never hated you, but it hurt me. Your silence hurt me more than your rejection. I left because I understood there was no place for me in your life. But even so, I never stopped hoping that you would look for me. I told our daughter that her mother was brave, although I knew that in reality her mother was just afraid. Take care of her if she ever returns, and tell her that I loved her more than my own life. Stella. Robert let the letter fall onto the empty crib. Emily picked it up and held it against her chest. Her lips trembled, but she wasn't crying. It was as if finally, after a lifetime, someone had answered the deepest question of her soul. My mum did love me, she whispered. Carol approached her and put her hand on her shoulder. Emily didn't pull away. She always loved you, Carol said. I was the one who failed. Robert looked at both of them, and inside him, everything he had once believed was solid was cracking. But something unsettled him. What if Stella didn't die? The two of them looked at him at the same time. What are you saying? Emily asked. That this letter doesn't seem written by someone who knew they were about to die. It seems a provisional goodbye, as if she planned to return. Carol frowned. They declared her dead. That's what they told me. What if that wasn't the case? What if someone else organized everything to keep her away? Robert turned on his heel, left the room, and went straight to the hallway closet. He opened one of the drawers where Carol kept old papers. He started pulling out documents until he found what he was looking for. A yellowish sheet from the upstate New York Department of Health. A death certificate. He read it carefully. Name, Stella Peterson. Age, 37. Cause of death, respiratory failure. Hospital, Upstate General Hospital. Date, unspecified. Mum, this has no date, no doctor's signature, no official record number. Carol approached him. She read the sheet carefully. I never saw that before. What if this certificate is fake? Robert turned to look at Emily. What if Stella is alive? The silence was absolute, and in the middle of that silence, someone knocked on the door. 3 dry knocks, firm. Carol walked toward the entrance, her heart pounding. She opened it, and on the other side of the door was a woman, older, with completely white hair, a scar over her eyebrow, and eyes exactly like Carol's. Hello, sister, the woman said in a trembling voice. You took your time opening that darn door. The image of Stella in the doorway was like a direct punch to Carol's chest. Time hadn't erased her features, only worn them down gently. The eyes were the same, dark and large, but now they hid a story much longer than Carol had dared to imagine. Stella didn't seem surprised. Tired, yes, but not surprised, as if she had been rehearsing this reunion for years. Carol took a step toward her, her mouth slightly open, the words stuck in her throat. It's you, she managed to say in a whisper. Stella looked her up and down and nodded slowly. It's me, and you are still you, though more hunched over. I thought. Carol couldn't continue. I know. And I thought you would open that door for me someday. But look how long it took. The silence that followed was dense. Behind Carol, Emily and Robert watched without moving, like witnesses to something sacred they didn't know if they could or should interrupt. Come in, Carol finally said, stepping aside to let her enter. Stella crossed the threshold with slow but firm steps. As she set foot inside the house, she paused, looking at every corner as if checking that everything was still in its place. Her eyes stopped at the photograph hanging on the wall, an old image of her and Carol as girls, embracing next to their mother, and then at Emily, who was watching her with her mouth slightly open, trying to process what she was seeing. "Are you?" Emily asked, taking a step forward. "Yes," Stella replied before Emily finished the sentence. "I am your mother, and my name is Stella Peterson. And no, I'm not dead." Robert approached Carol and took her arm, as if needing to support her. Carol didn't pull away. "How is this possible?" Carol asked, still not believing it. "How did you survive?" Stella looked at her. Her eyes grew colder. "Do you really want me to tell you now, here, after all these years?" "I want to understand," Carol said. "And now you're finally ready to listen to me?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation. Stella took a deep breath and approached the dining room table. She sat down without being asked. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was clear. "The night of the fire. I already knew something was going to happen. I felt the atmosphere was strange. Dad was nervous. Mum wasn't sleeping. Miss Jackie was coming in and out of the house as if it were hers. That night," she paused. "That night I wasn't sick. They had given me something. A strange tea. I fell asleep. When I woke up, I was outside. A truck was taking me down a dirt road, wrapped in a blanket." Carol covered her mouth. Emily closed her eyes. "Jackie was the one who took me out. She took me to a house on the outskirts of upstate New York. They told me you knew, that you had agreed to my being taken away, that you had kept the girl, and that I was no longer a part of your life." "That's not true," Carol exclaimed. They told me you had died." "Who told you that?" Stella asked, raising her voice. "Who told you that, Carol?" "Mom. Jackie." Stella laughed, a hollow, bitter laugh. "Of course. The same ones who decided for us. The ones who buried my name, my story, and my daughter." Robert ran his hands over his face. "This is crazy." "No, son," Stella said, looking at him tenderly. "This is what happens when the women in a family are silenced. They silenced us. They separated us. And they forced us to live with guilt and fear." "And what happened to you?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you come back?" Stella looked at her, and something broke on her face. "I looked for you, but every door was closed to me. Once I tried to enter this house. You were about 6 years old. I hid in the shadows. I heard your laughter. You were playing with a red balloon in the yard. But Carol came out. She looked at me. She told me to leave, to never come back. And I obeyed." "You didn't know what you were saying," Carol interrupted. "I was scared. I was afraid they would take Robert from me too. I was afraid of losing everything." "And what did you do?" Stella replied with a firm voice. "You lost me." Emily took a step back. "And what do you want now?" Stella lowered her gaze. "I only came to see you, my daughter, to know you are well. I didn't come to demand anything. I only needed to close this chapter. Because I'm dying, Emily." Silence filled the room again. Emily put her hand to her mouth. "What did you say?" "I have cancer. Terminal. I only have a few months left. I found out recently. And before I go, the only thing I wished for was to see my girl one last time." Robert lowered his head. Carol fell into the nearest chair. Emily, paralyzed, didn't know what to say. She didn't know whether to cry, run, hug her, or scream everything she had never said. "I understand if you don't love me," Stella said. "If you don't forgive me. If you don't believe me. But I'm here. For you." Emily took a deep breath. She took a step forward. And another. until she was standing in front of her. She raised her hand and stroked her cheek. I don't hate you, Mum, but I don't know if I love you. I don't know if I can, but thank you for coming back. Stella closed her eyes, holding back tears. That's enough. Then Robert approached the two of them, and for the first time, he hugged them, together. A reunited mother, a wounded daughter, a brother who was just beginning to understand. And as they hugged, Carol watched them from the corner. She knew time did not forgive. But maybe, just maybe, there was still something left to save. Though she didn't imagine that someone else was watching them from outside. A figure in the shadows, who had followed this reunion in silence, and who would not allow the truth to destroy what she had worked so hard to hide. The darkness had fallen over the house in the Lower East Side, but inside, the light of a truth that not even the night could extinguish still burned. Carol, Stella, Emily, and Robert were still gathered in the living room, sitting without talking, as if each one were fitting new pieces into a puzzle that was finally beginning to reveal the complete picture. No one was in a hurry to leave. No one dared to break that fragile balance. That's when a creak was heard. Robert immediately stood up. He walked toward the main door and looked through the curtain. No one was there. But something didn't feel right. The gate, which was always closed, was barely ajar. Who else knew we would be here today? Robert asked, returning to the living room. Stella shook her head. Emily looked at her mother. Only Roger and Father Eugene. No one else. And Susan? Robert asked in a low voice, almost guiltily. Carol took a moment to answer. I didn't tell her anything, but... She fell silent. Stella looked at her intently. But what? A few days ago I found a note inside the shed at the cemetery. A threat. It was signed with silence. But the handwriting, although printed, had a very clear intention. It was Susan. Robert ran a hand over his face, frustrated. She's used to controlling everything, and now she's losing power. That makes her dangerous. Do you think she came here? Emily asked. It wouldn't be the first time, Carol murmured. Robert made a decision. I'm going to check the yard. I'll be right back. He went out with a flashlight. He walked slowly down the side hallway of the house. The air was cold, thick. The trees in the backyard creaked. When he turned the corner that led to the backyard, he saw it. An envelope, carefully placed on the threshold of the kitchen door. He picked it up cautiously. It had no return address, but his name was written on it by hand. Robert. He went back into the house without saying anything. Everyone looked at him. He opened the envelope. It was a single printed sheet. He read aloud. Robert. Don't be fooled. Everything you are experiencing is not true. That woman you say is your aunt is playing games with you. You have no idea what really happened. Carol has lied to you your whole life, and now she has convinced this Emily to help her keep what is yours. They are manipulating you. Doesn't it seem strange to you that a Stella appears just when she signed the will in Emily's name? Open your eyes. If you continue to believe them, you will lose everything. Susan. Robert lowered the sheet. His jaw was clenched, his breathing ragged. I can't believe this, he murmured. Of course it's from her, Carol said. She wants to divide us. She always wanted to. And she is succeeding, Stella added bitterly, because even now, she still has power over you. Robert looked at her. Do you think this was planned? No, I know it wasn't. But I do believe Susan is capable of anything. If she managed to manipulate you for decades, what won't she do now that she feels cornered? Emily stood up. And what if letters aren't enough anymore? What if she decides to do something worse? Like what? Carol asked. I don't know, but I don't want to wait to find out. Robert looked at her intently. He saw a strength in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. It wasn't resentment. It was determination. What do you propose? Go to the lawyer, now. Get the will validated. Get it registered, so it can't be annulled. And if necessary, let's summon Susan. Let her hear it face to face. Carol hesitated. I don't want to provoke her. It's not provoking her, Robert said. It's stopping her. Stella let out a dry laugh from the armchair. And you think a piece of paper is going to stop a woman who spent her whole life destroying things from the shadows? Maybe not, Emily replied. But at least we won't give her the satisfaction of continuing to silence us. Robert nodded. Tomorrow morning we'll go to the notary. The next day, before dawn, Robert went alone to look for Father Eugene. He needed to talk to someone who wasn't directly involved, someone who had known Susan for years. They sat in the parish backyard. The priest served coffee and sweet rolls. Do you think Susan is capable of destroying evidence? Robert asked, without preamble. Robert, son, the priest replied. You know the answer. I knew Susan when she was a girl. Quiet, intelligent, cold. And when she married you, she changed. But not for the better. She started isolating your mother, controlling your decisions. And what always worried me the most was how she made you feel, as if you didn't have the right to question her. And I didn't? No, but now you can. Robert lowered his head. Father, did you know Stella was alive? Father Eugene looked at him for a few seconds. I knew there was a possibility, but I never wanted to give you false hope. What matters now is that she returned, and you have a sister, and a story to face. Are you ready? Robert looked up, and the doubt was gone from his face. Yes, and if Susan interferes? This time I'm not going to keep quiet. What neither of them knew was that a few yards away, hidden behind a garden fence, someone was listening to them. Someone who already had a plan, and who did not intend to let that family, or anyone else, strip her of what she considered hers. Robert returned from the parish with a transformed face. The conversation with Father Eugene had been revealing, but not because of what was said, but because of what he himself was finally able to accept. He had listened for years to the version that was most convenient for him, the comfortable one, the simple one, the one that spared him the effort of questioning. Now he understood how easy it had been for Susan to dominate him, because he himself had conceded everything to her. Upon arriving home, he found Carol asleep in a chair next to Stella. Emily was in the kitchen pouring coffee. Everything seemed calm on the outside, but inside, he was boiling. He entered, approached Emily, and spoke to her with a voice that was barely broken. I need you to come with me to the notary tomorrow. She looked up, surprised. What for? Robert held her gaze firmly. To sign a new document, in your name, legal, protected, that neither Susan nor anyone else can touch. Mum already did it, but now it's my turn. Emily was silent for a few seconds, not because she doubted him, but because she never thought she would hear him say that. Are you sure? For the first time, yes. It's not about assets. It's about justice and also forgiveness. The next morning, Robert woke up early, before the sun. He checked the safe in his bedroom. The house documents were there, the deeds, the insurance policy, even Carol's old will, the first one that she thought Susan had destroyed, but which, in secret, he had hidden when he found it days after his mother was expelled from the house. He hadn't destroyed it. He had saved it, because even though at that moment he didn't have the courage to confront his wife, He didn't have the heart to burn that last will either. He took the document, placed it inside a briefcase, and left. They arrived at the notary office shortly before 9. The same notary who had received Carol was now waiting for them with a sober face, like someone who knows that what is about to be signed is not just a paper, but a moral repair. Robert signed. Emily, still in shock, did too. "As of today," he said, looking at the notary, "I don't want this property to be in my name again. It belongs to her, because it was taken away from her, and because I can no longer keep running away from what we did." On the way back home, Emily didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Robert understood her silence. It was a silence of internal processes, of personal reconciliations, of a broken girl who, for the first time, felt she was being seen not as a mistake of the past, but as a fundamental part of a story. But upon arriving, something wasn't right. The main door was open. Robert ran. He went inside. Carol and Stella were gone. Emily followed him inside. The living room was in disarray. Carol's chair overturned, Stella's cup broken on the floor. "Mom!" Robert shouted. "Aunt?" No one answered. They checked the rooms. Nothing. They went out to the yard. Empty. Emily ran to the backyard. She shouted her mother's name. "Stella!" Silence. Robert found a folded note on the table, handwritten. He recognized the handwriting immediately. "Susan, I told you. If you didn't step aside, the consequences would be yours. Now I have them. And if you want to see them again, leave everything as it is. Don't talk to lawyers. Don't talk to the police. If you do anything, you won't see them again. You chose." Robert froze. Emily snatched the note from him. She read it. Her face hardened. "What are we going to do?" Robert took a deep breath. For the first time, he didn't let fear dominate him. "We are going to confront her, and this time we won't do it alone." He took out his cell phone. He dialed. Roger answered on the second ring. "Roger, I need you to come right now. Susan took my mother and Stella, and I want them back. Today." Without hanging up, Robert turned to Emily, and in his eyes there was no more guilt. There was a promise. "She thinks she still has control, but this time she's going to run into the truth, and with us, together, ready for whatever comes." The day dawned grey, as if the sky knew something bad was about to happen. Inside the house in the Lower East Side, the atmosphere was even heavier. Robert was reading the threatening note Susan had left for the 5th time, while Emily organized the notary papers on the table, each one protected in manila envelopes. Roger arrived at 8, as they had agreed. He entered with a hardened face, the same one he wore when he had to intervene in a particularly difficult burial at the cemetery. "Are you sure it was her?" he asked, locking the door. "There's no doubt," Robert replied. "Her handwriting, her style, her poison. And do you know where she might have taken them?" "No," Emily intervened. "And that's the most terrifying thing. Susan is unpredictable. We don't know if she's furious or if she had everything planned." Roger took a small envelope from his jacket. "I made some calls early this morning. An old friend who works at the food market told me he saw Susan last night near a closed store. She was with 2 older women. One looked very weak." Emily took a step forward. "Where exactly?" "On the outskirts of Queens." He said what caught his attention was that they weren't using a car. They arrived by taxi and then went into an old warehouse that was once a lumber yard. Robert grabbed the keys. "Let's go." But before leaving, Emily noticed something. "Wait, what if it's a trap?" Robert looked at her with contained anger. I'd rather fall into a trap than stay here with my arms crossed. They arrived at the address in 40 minutes. It was a half-abandoned industrial area, with graffiti-covered walls and structures corroded by dampness and time. The warehouse was at the end of a dead-end alley, closed with a rusty metal gate. Robert got out of the car cautiously, followed by Roger and Emily. No one spoke. No one breathed too much. They knocked. Silence. They knocked again. Nothing. Robert walked around the gate and found a half-open wooden board. They went in through there. The darkness inside was almost total, but the rays of light coming through the holes in the ceiling illuminated a scene none of them would ever forget. In the center of the warehouse, on top of some old sacks, lay Carol. She was stretched out, her head resting on a dirty blanket, her lips pale, her face dehydrated, her eyes closed. "Mom!" Robert shouted, running toward her. Carol opened her eyes with difficulty. "Robert," she whispered, "you took too long." "Where is Stella?" Emily asked with an urgent voice. "I don't know," Carol murmured. "They separated us yesterday afternoon. Susan left me here. She said one was enough, that she would take Stella somewhere else, that Stella owed her more." Robert held her. "We're going to get you out of here." "No," Carol said, shaking her head. "Don't move me. I'm not well." Roger took a bottle of water from his backpack and gave it to Emily. Carol took a sip and then closed her eyes, exhausted. "Listen to me well, Mum," Robert said, kneeling beside her. "You're not going to die here. I'm not going to lose you again." "Robert." She raised a trembling hand and placed it on his face. "I'm glad you're here." Emily sat on the other side. She took her other hand. "What did she do to you, Mum? Did she hit you?" Carol shook her head. "No. She just left me. She locked me in. She said she wanted to see me fading, slow, weak. She said she wanted you to understand what it's like to live without a mother, by choice." Robert clenched his fists. "Damn it!" "Don't hate her," Carol whispered. "Just stop her." Roger was already dialing Father Eugene. "Father, we found her. She's bad. We need help. And protection, too. Susan is loose, and she has Stella." "Did you call the police?" the priest asked from the other end of the line. "Not yet. We don't know if she has anyone else involved. I'll wait for you at the parish. It's safe there. Come as soon as you can." Robert and Roger lifted Carol carefully. Emily covered her back with a blanket. They walked to the car in silence. Every step Carol took was an eternity. Her body was fading, but her soul remained firm. "Where do you think Stella is?" Emily asked as they placed Carol in the back seat. Robert didn't reply. He only thought of one thing. Susan had crossed the line. And now revenge was no longer an option. It was justice. And this time, he wasn't going to tremble when facing her. Because Susan hadn't just taken his mother once. She was about to do it for a second time. And he wouldn't allow that. The ride to the parish was fast but tense. Robert drove with firm hands on the wheel, looking at the road with a mixture of anger, anxiety, and fear. Emily was in the back seat, hugging her mother's body, who could barely stay awake. Carol's skin was icy, her lips cracked, and her expression lifeless, as if her soul was already walking closer to goodbye than to reunion. Roger, in the passenger seat, incessantly called Stella's cell phone. Call after call went straight to voicemail. It was as if the whole world had decided to be silent at the most urgent moment of all. When they arrived at the parish, Father Eugene was waiting for them at the entrance with a blanket and a lamp in hand. He didn't say anything. He just looked at them with reddened eyes and guided Robert to an empty room at the back of the church, where missionaries usually stayed. "She'll be fine here for now," the priest said, as he spread some blankets on the makeshift bed. Emily helped lay Carol down. Robert adjusted a pillow under her head. She opened her eyes with effort. "Where am I?" "With us," Emily replied, taking her hand. "You're safe, Mum." Carol tried to speak, but could only move her lips without sound. "Shh, don't talk," Robert whispered. "Rest. The doctor will be here soon." Roger went out to look for help. The priest stayed quietly to one side. "Do you know where Stella might be?" Robert asked. The priest shook his head. "No, but I have an idea who might know." Meanwhile, in a still unknown place, Stella slowly opened her eyes. She was lying on a thin mattress on the floor, her wrists tied with a thick rope. The room was small, without windows. There was a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, flickering occasionally. In front of her, sitting on a plastic chair, was Susan. "How did you sleep, little sister?" she said, with a calm voice that hid poison. Stella didn't reply. She just looked at her with contempt. "You look older than I remember," Susan added with a twisted smile. "Although, of course, it's not like you've had time to take care of yourself between all the abandonment, right?" "What do you want from me?" Stella asked hoarsely. Susan shrugged. "Nothing. Just to remind you that you were always a nuisance. First to your mother, then to your sister, and now to me." Stella spat on the floor. "You took my daughter from me." Susan stood up, approached slowly, and crouched down to her level. "You lost her. Because you were weak. Because you ran away. Because you believed that by having a child out of wedlock you still had value. Life is for strong women, Stella. The ones who know how to destroy what threatens them. Like me." Stella smiled, though her body was shaking. "And yet you lost. Because Emily loves me. Because Robert left you. Because Carol, despite your years of venom, is alive. And you, Susan, are alone." Susan slapped her, not hard, but precisely. "Watch that mouth," she whispered. "Because if there's one thing I have plenty of, it's time. And if you provoke me, my hand won't tremble." Stella didn't speak again. She closed her eyes and focused on breathing. She knew everything depended on how much she could resist, how much time she could buy. Because something inside her told her her daughter was already looking for her. Back at the parish, Carol slept deeply. The doctor had stabilized her with an IV and left instructions for the priest not to move her for now. Robert, sitting next to the altar, couldn't stop looking at the cross. He had never been a man of faith. As a child, he went to Mass out of obligation, but now he found himself kneeling, with his eyes closed, whispering poorly memorized prayers, not out of devotion, but out of desperation. Emily watched him from a distance. She didn't want to interrupt him. She respected him. He, too, had lost something. Not his mother, not yet, but an entire life based on lies. "How are you?" she asked him when he stood up. Robert shrugged, afraid. "I'm scared too, but also angry, just like me." They looked at each other, no longer as strangers, no longer as half-siblings, but as survivors of a story they didn't ask for, but were determined to finish. "We'll find her," he said. "Yes," Emily replied, "but this time we're not going to wait for Susan to make another mistake. We're going to get ahead of her." Robert raised an eyebrow. "Do you have a plan?" "Not exactly," she admitted. "But I know where we can start. Susan always leaves something in her plans. A crack. She thinks she's so superior that she makes the same mistake over and over. She underestimates others. And what is that crack? I was raised by a woman like her. I learned to read her language, to detect her pattern, and there's someone who might be on her side without knowing it. Robert understood. Her family? Emily nodded. Ms. Jackie, her mother. I'll bet anything she knows more than she's said. Robert frowned. She helped us hide everything about Stella. It's likely she's covering for her again. Then let's go to her, Emily said. And if she doesn't want to talk, we'll give her a reason to. Robert nodded. And if what we find confirms what we suspect, then the complaint will be formal. This time, Susan will answer to the law. Emily extended her hand. Robert took it without hesitation. And as they left the parish, unknowingly, in a corner of the chapel hidden behind a column, a figure watched them. It wasn't Susan. It was someone who knew too much and was about to provide the missing piece of the puzzle, although not out of kindness, but out of guilt. The air inside the parish grew thicker as the day progressed. Outside, the city continued its usual routine, but within the church walls, time seemed to stand still. The room where Carol rested was barely illuminated by the golden light entering through a high window. Emily did not leave her side. Robert paced up and down the hallway, holding his cell phone, as if waiting for it to ring at any moment with news of Stella. Father Eugene entered silently with a white envelope in his hand. "This was delivered to me a few minutes ago," he said. "The person who brought it didn't give a name. They just asked me to give it to you, Robert." Robert took the envelope. It was sealed. He recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Carol's. "How?" Emily asked. "When did she write that?" "Last night, before she fell asleep," the priest replied. "She asked me to keep it, and only to give it to you if she—" He couldn't finish his sentence. Robert stood still. He walked to an empty bench. He carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten sheet, with shaky but clear writing. He began to read aloud, while Emily and Father Eugene sat close by, in silence. "Robert, if you are reading this, it's because I couldn't tell you in my own words what I wanted to shout for so many years. You were not raised in a lie. You were raised in silence. When Emily was born, I had already lost everything. Your father had abandoned me. Stella had been expelled. Our mother had chosen her reputation over her blood. And I, with a child in my arms, made a decision to keep quiet. To keep quiet so you could have a simpler life. To keep quiet so you wouldn't be judged. To keep quiet to protect you. But silence rots us inside, son. And mine rotted my soul. Emily was not just my niece. She was my daughter, too. I cared for her. I hugged her. I watched her take her first steps. I took her to the doctor. I tucked her in at night until she was taken from me. They told me it was for the best, that I couldn't handle two, and as a good woman raised in obedience, I obeyed. Since then, every time you smiled, I remembered her smile. Every time you cried, I remembered how she cried. You don't know how hard it was to raise you, loving you so much, and at the same time with a guilt that wouldn't let me sleep. Robert, forgive me. Not just for what I did, but for everything I didn't have the courage to do. If you are reading this, it's because now you know the truth. I love you. And if you ever decide to forgive me, promise me one thing, that you won't repeat history. Don't silence what needs to be said. Don't abandon someone who needs to be embraced. Don't betray your own blood, because time does not forgive. Your mother, Carol." Robert finished reading, his voice breaking. He rested his elbows on his knees and covered his face. Emily approached him. She didn't touch him. It wasn't necessary. The silence between the two said it all. It's the first time she's ever told me she loves me, Robert murmured, without lifting his head. And she did it when you needed to hear it most, Emily said. Father Eugene stood up. Carol is still alive, but her body is at its limit. Her soul is at peace. What she needed to say, she said. What she needed to heal has begun to open. Now it's up to you that this peace is not lost with the days. Robert nodded. And what if we can't find Stella in time? You will find her, the priest replied with faith, because truths that burn do not disappear. They only hide, and this one is already coming to light. Robert stood up. He put the letter in the inner pocket of his jacket. He went to the room where Carol was sleeping. He entered alone. He approached her. He stroked her hair. He didn't know if she could hear him. He didn't know if she was conscious. But he said it anyway. I forgive you, Mum. And then, as if the universe had been waiting for those words, Carol's eyelids moved. Slowly, she opened her eyes. Robert, she murmured. I'm here, Mum. I'm here. She looked at him. She smiled faintly. Do you know everything now? Robert nodded. Yes. And Emily? She knows too. Carol turned her face slightly. Emily was already entering. Mum, she said, holding back tears. We are together. Finally. Carol extended her hand toward the two of them. Robert took one, Emily the other. Forgiven, she said. Not as mother, daughter, and brother, but as a reconstructed family, one that no longer needed more words, only time and faith. But while the embrace held them, outside in the parish alley, a figure watched from the shadows. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't chance. It was the beginning of the final betrayal, and no one was prepared for what was about to happen. Outside, the afternoon was slowly setting, as if the sun itself refused to leave before seeing how that story ended. Inside the parish, the silence was not empty. It was a pause charged with emotion, with goodbye, with a closure that felt as inevitable as it was necessary. Carol was still lying on the makeshift cot, her face pale but peaceful. Her eyes, dimmed for days, now shone with a clarity that only those who no longer fear anything possess. Robert and Emily remained by her side, holding her hands as if with that they could keep her a little longer. There were no more words to say. Everything had already been said, or almost everything. Father Eugene entered at that moment, with a small notebook in his hand. He approached slowly and leaned toward Carol. Do you want me to read it now? She nodded very slowly. Robert looked at him, confused. Read what? Eugene took a deep breath. He stood next to the head of the bed and opened the notebook to a page marked with a red ribbon. Your mother dictated this to me 3 nights ago. She said she couldn't leave without making it clear. In front of you. Robert swallowed. Emily moved closer. Eugene began to read. Robert, son, if you are here, it's because you chose to stay. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but because something in your heart told you it was worth looking back. I am not a saint. I was wrong many times. I let fear defeat me. I pushed my sister away. I lost your father, and I dragged you into a life of silences and omissions. But if I did one thing right, it was not stopping loving you, even if I hurt you. I also loved Emily, even if I didn't know how. I was the mother of 2 children who were not alike, but who carried the same blood. Yours, who called me Mum with pride, and hers, who looked at me like a stranger. Both of you were my reasons, and if I could go back in time, I wouldn't keep silent. I would tell the truth, just like now. And if anyone ever asks you who Carol Peterson was, I want you to say that she was a broken woman who still tried to love with the pieces she had left. The priest closed the notebook. Robert's eyes were filled with tears. Emily was breathing deeply, as if she didn't want to cry but couldn't help it. Carol, with difficulty, raised her hand. Robert. He bent down next to her. I'm here, Mum. She stroked his face weakly. Promise me you will never again close the door on someone who needs you. Robert nodded, his lips trembling. I promise. Promise me you will take care of Emily, not as an obligation, but as what she is, your sister. I will. Always. Carol smiled. And promise me you won't allow this to happen again, that no one else lives in fear of telling the truth. Robert took her hand. I swear it to you. She closed her eyes, tired, but still conscious. Emily leaned in and kissed her on the forehead. Thank you, she said in a low voice, for trying, for breaking yourself for love. Carol didn't respond, but her lips curled slightly into a smile. Father Eugene blessed the room. Then he stepped away. Outside, the figure who had been watching them from the shadows for the past few days finally approached. It was Jackie, Susan's mother. She entered slowly, her head bowed, without anyone inviting her. But no one stopped her. Robert looked at her, surprised. What are you doing here? Jackie looked up. Her eyes were red, her hands clenched over her purse. I didn't come to defend my daughter. I came because I have something to say. Emily frowned. Now? Jackie nodded. Yes, because I got tired of watching her repeat what I did, because I was the one who convinced Carol to give up Emily. I was the one who helped fake Stella's death. I was the one who destroyed the original will. And I was the one who taught Susan that power is in silence. Robert froze. Why are you saying this now? Jackie took a step toward Carol, who was still listening with her eyes closed. Because I saw her last night, here, in this bed, and she reminded me of myself. She reminded me of what I am, and what I no longer want to be. Emily approached. Do you know where Stella is? Jackie nodded. Yes, and if you want to save her, you have to go now, because Susan is becoming more dangerous. She's not thinking straight anymore, and she can do something that can't be undone. Robert looked at her intently. Where? Jackie told him. In a low voice, through clenched teeth, like someone spitting out a secret that has poisoned them their whole life. Robert turned to look at Emily. Let's go get her. And as they left, Carol murmured one last time, barely audible. Don't leave her alone. She was my daughter, too. The sky over New York City dawned cloudy, as if the whole world had stopped to keep silent. The wind was gentle, but constant, like an invisible caress that enveloped the still sleeping streets. Inside the parish, Carol's body rested on a simple, light-colored wooden casket, without luxurious adornments, but surrounded by flowers that left no room for forgetfulness. There was no music. There were no pre-written speeches. There was only presence. People arrived with slow steps, some with surprised faces, others with tears even before crossing the door. Neighbors from the Lower East Side. Women Carol had helped in her youth without anyone knowing. Men who once received a hot soup from her during hard times. Single mothers who watched her raise Robert with more determination than resources. And everyone knew. Everyone knew that the woman sleeping in the casket was not just a mother who aged in silence, but a warrior who had loved awkwardly, with fear, but also with her whole soul. Robert stood firm beside the casket, dressed in black, his face pale and his eyes sunken. By his side, Emily. She wore a dark blue shawl that had belonged to Carol. In her hands, she held a small wooden box that she hadn't wanted to open since the night before. Stella, still weak but standing, occupied the first pew on the left side. Father Eugene presided over the ceremony, but he didn't give a sermon. He spoke like a man who had accompanied the human pain of a family for more than 3 generations. "Today we are not just burying a body," he said softly. "Today we are saying goodbye to the story of a woman who fought as best she could against what the world imposed on her. Carol was not perfect. She didn't always know what to do, but she never stopped trying. And that, in these times, is an act of faith." When he finished his words, everyone observed a minute of silence, a silence that seemed eternal. It was then that Emily stood up, walked to the casket, and placed the small wooden box on top. She slowly opened it. Inside were 3 objects: a portrait of Stella and Carol as girls, a broken rag doll, the same one Emily once held when she couldn't yet speak, and a letter. "This letter," Emily said, her voice trembling, "I found among the things Mum left hidden in the room that remained closed for more than 40 years. It is addressed to both of us, to me and to her." Robert lowered his head. Stella began to cry in silence. Emily opened the paper and read, "To my daughters, because even though one called me Mum and the other never dared to do so, I loved you both with the same fear, with the same clumsiness, with the same hope. Forgive me for everything I didn't say. Forgive me for everything I hid. If this letter reaches your hands, it is because time gave me one last chance to tell you that I never wanted to hurt you. That if I pushed you away, it was because I didn't know how to hold you without breaking myself. That if you ever saw me defeated, it was only because I had no more strength, but never no more love. You are the only good thing I did in this life. Don't remember me for what I failed at, but for what I resisted." Emily folded the letter with trembling hands. She placed it on Carol's chest inside the casket. "Rest in peace, Mum," she whispered. "You don't have to carry anything anymore." Robert put an arm around her. Stella stood up and approached. Between the 3 of them, they closed the casket. Then they carried it together, accompanied by Roger, Father Eugene, and a couple of men from the neighborhood. They walked in procession to Greenwood Cemetery, the same place where Carol had been abandoned, the same place where she had been forgotten, and where she was now finally recognized. In front of the freshly dug grave, Robert took a deep breath. "I didn't know how to protect you, Mum. I didn't know how to understand you, but I promised to honor you." Emily left a final offering on the headstone, the restored portrait of Carol and Stella, an enlarged and framed copy where both girls smiled, unaware of the storm that awaited them. "A different story begins here," Emily said, "one that we won't write with fear." Stella closed her eyes. "Thank you, sister." The 3 of them stayed there a little longer, without haste, their souls at peace, because the cycle had finally closed. And in the midst of the pain, something new had been born, something that neither time, nor abandonment, nor silence could destroy: true love. But when everything seemed to be over, Robert received a call. The number was unknown. He answered. On the other end, a male voice, trembling. "Is this Robert Peterson?" "Yes, it is. Who is speaking?" "I'm a nurse. I work at a private clinic, and a woman was just dropped off here. She didn't give her name, but she asked us to call you. She said you—" "I'm her son." "What woman? Who?" The nurse replied cautiously. "She said her name was Susan. And she's very serious. It looks like she tried to take her own life." Robert was silent for a few seconds, holding the phone against his ear. The nurse's voice still echoed in his head. Susan tried to take her life. He didn't know if it was sadness, anger, or compassion what he felt. He only knew that, even though she was the last person he ever thought he'd see again, he couldn't ignore that call. Emily, still in front of Carol's grave, looked at him without speaking. Robert slowly lowered the phone. "It's Susan," he said, his voice tense. "She's alive, but very critical." Emily didn't respond immediately. She just lowered her gaze, breathing deeply, as if a part of her refused to open a new chapter just as another had closed. "Where is she?" "In a private clinic, near downtown. It seems someone dropped her off there, and she asked them to call me." "And what are you going to do?" Robert hesitated. "I'm going to go. Not for her, but for what's left of me. I need to finish all of this, what connects me to her shadow." 3 hours later, Robert walked down the white hallway of a small, quiet clinic. Every step echoed, as if the place itself refused to hide the emptiness. A nurse guided him to a room at the end of the hall. Susan was connected to an IV, her eyes closed, and her skin greyish. A nurse monitored the machines in silence. Seeing him enter, she discreetly left. Robert approached with slow steps. He stood by the bedside. He didn't say anything. He didn't touch anything. Susan barely opened her eyes. "You came?" Robert didn't reply. "I thought you wouldn't," she said with a hoarse voice, barely a whisper. "I didn't do it for you," he replied, not harshly, but with the firmness of someone who has crossed too many lines to keep going backward. "I came to close the story, to leave no loose ends, and because, despite everything, I don't want to be like you." Susan looked at him for a few seconds. "I have nothing left," she said. "No house, no inheritance, no family. Did you decide that?" "No." He shook his head slightly. "You decided it. Carol, you, Emily, you took what was mine." Robert leaned in slightly. "It was never yours. You lived a lie, Susan, and you dragged everyone with you. But it's over now. Mum is gone with peace. Emily rebuilt her story, and I no longer belong to you." Susan closed her eyes, defeated. "You're going to leave me alone." Robert took a deep breath. "I'm going to do what you never did. I'm not going to abandon you, but I'm not going to forgive you easily either. You're going to live. You're going to face the consequences. And if you ever truly want to redeem yourself, it won't be with tears. It will be with truth." Susan said nothing more. Robert left the room without looking back. 2 weeks later, Emily met with the notary at the house in the Lower East Side. They had decided, by mutual agreement, to officially renounce the inheritance. Emily signed the document in front of Robert, Father Eugene, Roger, and some neighbours Carol had helped throughout her life. The notary looked up. "So is it clear that you, Emily Peterson Gonzalez, the rightful heir, renounce the property?" Emily nodded. "Yes, I don't want the house. I want what it represents." Robert frowned. "And what does it represent?" Emily stood up, took the envelope with the deeds, and handed it to Father Eugene. "I want this place to become a home for elderly women who have nowhere to go. Women like Carol. Women like Stella. Forgotten women." Father Eugene looked at her with emotion in his eyes. "Are you sure?" "More than ever. This house witnessed abandonment, fear, silence. Now it will be a refuge of truth." Robert approached and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you." Emily smiled tenderly at him. And I am proud of Mum. Days later, as the repairs began on the house, Emily found herself alone in Carol's old room. The room was no longer dark or sad. The windows were open. Light entered without fear. On the desk was a photo. Carol with Robert and Emily, taken a few weeks before her departure. Everyone smiling. Carol in the center, as it should be. Emily took it, wiped it with a handkerchief, and placed it on the shelf next to a vase of fresh flowers. "This place will be your legacy, Mum," she whispered. "No one will be left behind here." And as she spoke, a woman knocked on the door. She was tall, thin, with grey hair and a worn suitcase. "Is this where you help women who are alone?" she asked with a trembling voice. Emily smiled. "Yes, it is. Come in. Welcome home." The woman entered with slow steps, and Emily closed the door behind her. Because the cycle that began with abandonment was now closing with dignity. But there was still something left to do. Robert looked at a folder on his desk. Inside were all the proofs of Susan's crimes, the forgeries, the threats, the recorded confession, the altered documents. And he had a decision to make, a final one, because forgiveness can heal, but justice must speak. 1 week after Carol's funeral, the Lower East Side neighborhood was no longer the same. Not because its streets had changed or its facades looked different, but because something invisible had been removed. The weight of years of silence, of unnamed injustices, of truths hidden under layers of what was right and what was unspoken. Robert walked alone on the sidewalk where, as a child, he played marbles with other neighbors. Every step brought back a memory. His mother waiting for him at the gate, calling him in for dinner. Her voice, soft but firm. Her hands, always busy. Her gaze, always more tired than she let on. Now he understood everything. That day, he wore a white shirt and grey pants. Nothing ostentatious. Only what was necessary to face what he had decided to do. He carried a folder with legal papers, photographs, letters, will documents, and certified copies of everything that had happened. It wasn't just a presentation. It was an act of public justice. He had summoned the neighbors, old and new, to a meeting in the community hall. It wasn't common for someone to call a neighborhood assembly without being a politician or a delegate. But everyone came, because everyone knew who Carol Peterson had been. And everyone, in some way, owed her something. When he entered, there were more than 30 people waiting for him. Some looked at him with curiosity, others with respect, a couple with lingering resentment. But no one left. Robert stood in front of the makeshift microphone on the wooden platform. He swallowed, took a deep breath, and spoke. "Good morning. Thank you for coming. I didn't come to talk about politics, or money, or inheritance. I came to talk about a woman who was a mother, a sister, a neighbor, and who for many years was forgotten even by those who should have loved her most." Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My mother, Carol Peterson, was a woman many saw pass by, but few knew how to truly see. She raised her son alone. She raised me, and for decades, she lived with a burden that she wasn't supposed to carry alone. Robert took a folded sheet from his folder. This letter was written by her before she died. And I want to share a fragment. If anyone ever remembers me, I want them to do so not for what I silenced, but for what I resisted. My mother was silenced by a society that judges more than it embraces, that demands perfection but never forgives mistakes. And I was part of that silence. I was an accomplice out of cowardice, but no more. A deep silence fell over the room. That is why today I announce that, in her memory, and in the name of all elderly women who are abandoned, humiliated, or made invisible, I am founding an organization with my sister Emily and father Eugene that will bear my mother's name, Carol's House. There was a murmur among the attendees. Some smiled, others lowered their heads. It will be a safe space for elderly women without homes, without family, or in situations of abandonment. We will give them food, shelter, care, companionship, and most importantly, dignity. Because my mother died with dignity, and I want many others to be able to do so as well. The applause was immediate. They weren't euphoric. They were sincere. Emily entered at that moment, with Stella by her side. She walked to the front with Robert and spoke. I am Emily Peterson. I was denied for years. I was called the child of a mistake. But today I am the heir of a story I am not ashamed of. Because the women who came before me resisted what I never would have endured. And I didn't come here to keep houses or papers. I came to honor them. More applause, more tears. Robert ended the assembly with a call. I invite you to participate, to help, not with money, but with presence. Go to Carol's house, listen to a story, hug a woman. Don't let oblivion take what is still alive. In the end, most approached him. Emily, Stella. They offered groceries, furniture, legal support, and volunteer work. And for the first time, the Lower East Side was not just a neighborhood, it was a reconstructed home. But as the hall emptied and the applause died down, a message arrived on Robert's cell phone. It was from the hospital where Susan was still admitted. It only said, Susan's condition has worsened. She asks to see you. She says she has something more to confess, and she doesn't want to die without telling the complete truth. Robert arrived at the clinic with a heavy heart. The night was thick, and the city seemed to have paused in a sigh. The white lights of the hospital flickered over his tired face as he walked down the silent hallway. Weeks had passed since Carol's burial, and although his grief still lived inside him, life dragged him toward one last piece of unfinished business. Susan was still alive, frail, unrecognizable, but alive. And she had asked to see him, not to reconcile, not for him to forgive her, but to confess the last thing she had kept hidden. A nurse showed him the room. Robert entered. The atmosphere smelled of alcohol and loneliness. Susan was lying down, emaciated, her face covered by the shadow of regret. Her sunken eyes lit up slightly as she saw him enter. "You came?" she said with a broken voice. "And I was about to not," Robert replied without approaching. Susan swallowed. She had the most vulnerable gaze he had ever seen on her. "I don't have much strength left, but I don't want to take this to the grave." Robert waited. Susan took a long pause, as if gathering the courage to speak cost her every breath. "When Emily was born, I was 11 years old. My mother was the one who helped take her out of that house, but she didn't do it alone. Carol doesn't know it, but I was there. I saw everything. I saw Stella cry. I saw how they deceived her, and I stayed quiet. Why? Because I was taught since childhood that what is not named doesn't hurt. And because since I was little, I was taught to despise women who made mistakes." She turned slightly toward him. "But now I know that it wasn't them who were wrong. It was us who kept quiet, who obeyed, and who lied to sustain that whole rotten castle." Robert took a step toward the bed. "And why now?" Susan looked directly at him. "Because I saw what you did. Because I saw how you cared for Carol when she had no strength left. How you hugged Emily. How you restored that house. And because for the first time, I felt alienated from all of it. And I don't want to die being only that. the shadow of a woman who didn't know how to love. Robert didn't reply. He didn't cry. He just looked at her for a few seconds, and then he lowered his head. "I hope you find your peace, Susan." She closed her eyes. "Thank you for coming." Robert left the room. Outside, the wind blew strongly, and for the first time since his mother's death, he felt light. Months later, Greenwood Cemetery received fresh flowers again. Emily, standing in front of a new white marble headstone, held a bouquet of carnations. Robert arrived by her side, holding Stella's arm. The three of them looked at the freshly engraved inscription: Carol Peterson and Stella Peterson, sisters until the end. The truth, even if late, always blossoms. Emily placed the bouquet on the grave. "It doesn't hurt like before," she whispered. "Now I'm just grateful that we knew in time." Robert spoke. "And now Carol gets to live not just in our memories, but in every woman who walks through that door at Carol's house and finds shelter." Stella cried in silence, not out of sadness, but out of closure. "Thank you for giving me back my daughter," she said to Robert. "And thank you for giving me back my sister." Emily hugged them both. She would be proud. Together they stayed there for a while longer, without rushing, their souls at peace. Because the cycle had finally closed, and in the midst of the pain, something new had been born. Something that neither time, nor abandonment, nor silence could destroy. True love. And if you who are listening got this far, I want to invite you from the bottom of my heart to subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and leave your like if this story moved you in any way. I also invite you to write the word resistance in the comments. Because if Carol taught us anything, it's that resisting is also a way of loving. And if you can, leave a super thanks to help this channel continue sharing more stories like this, full of truth, emotion, and humanity. Thank you for staying until the end. And remember, what is silenced sometimes also screams.